Yeom Sung-gi lived like a prisoner sealed inside his own room, all because his father and stepmother made his life miserable, while the friends he trusted betrayed him and turned into his bullies. To escape the pain, he shut himself away and spent every free hour gaming, until he became the greatest Minecraft player anyone in that world had ever seen. He spent his days designing game maps, crafting entire worlds where nobody could reach him or hurt him. Then one night a blazing portal tore open right in the center of his room. Out of the flames stepped Baphomet, one of Hell's strongest demons. The demon came with one simple offer. Hell had run out of space and needed to expand. He wanted the main character to design the 20th layer of Hell. In exchange, he would gain the power to drag any traitor straight into that place. The young man accepted without a second thought. He made betrayal the core theme of his new hell. He created a prison no one could ever escape, and once it was complete, he hunted down the people who ruined him one by one. The boy who had spent months trapped in his room now held a key, and he knew exactly which doors needed to be opened. His backstabbing friends would be the first ones punished. After that, maybe he would change the world without repeating Kira's mistakes. But everything began a few days before that. The main character was 18 years old and lived in a room that looked more like a forgotten storage closet. The window stayed shut, turning his gamer setup into a cage of loneliness. Outside, his father pounded on the door and shouted at him. He demanded that the boy come out, even though he was one of the biggest reasons the boy refused to leave. The woman beside him tried to calm him down. She told him to be patient. She had moved in right after the boy's mother left, and she clearly cared more about securing her own future than about the young man locked away in that room. Eventually, the two left for dinner, giving their son a little more peace. From inside the room, he heard every word. A moment later, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Kim Sung-hwan saying his suspension was over and he could return to school to get beaten again. 3 months earlier, inside a Korean school, one guy raised his fist and smashed someone so hard he sent him flying. The rest of the group laughed and mocked the beaten boy, though one of them looked uneasy. The victim was the main character, and the gang leader ordered him to stand up so he could hit him again. The beaten boy crawled closer. Then he begged Sung-hwan, the same uneasy guy, for mercy because they had been friends since elementary school. That old friend stared at him on the floor and remembered their past. But the moment broke when the gang leader asked if he had really been friends with a loser like that. The others mocked him, saying that must be why he could not hit the kid and kept acting scared. To protect his image instead of saving his friend, Sung-hwan chose to kick him. He doubled down and said they had never been friends, asking where he even got that stupid idea. Sung-hwan kept beating him without stopping. The other two kept feeding the humiliation. Even bruised and swollen, the boy spoke again and told him never to call him a friend. Sung-hwan did not want to be seen as a loser like him. Back in the present, the young man was still buried in his game, and his endless isolation suddenly made perfect sense. On the screen, the game asked if he wanted to save the Hellcraft map. He clicked yes and decided to upload the new map to the game. While it uploaded, he reviewed the map's features, because at least inside that digital world on his monitor, no one betrayed him. The young man posted the map link on the game's blog. Soon after, players began sending messages thanking him for his latest creation. Lying in bed, the boy tried to tell himself this was all he needed, but no matter how badly he wanted to believe that hiding in his room and making maps was enough, it was not. Deep down, he was lonely and terrified that stepping outside would only lead to another betrayal. After sleeping for a while, he woke up again, figuring his father and that woman were probably asleep by now. He returned to his computer to read the latest comments on the map he had built. More praise kept rolling in. Players loved how brutal, polished, and cleverly designed his maps were. Seeing people appreciate his work genuinely made him happy. Then a fresh message alert suddenly popped up in the corner of his monitor. The message was strange enough to make him pause. It read, "Hello human, I enjoyed your game. It rivals real hell quite well. May I speak with you directly about creating a hell?" Yeom Sung-gi felt like some kid was inviting him to a job interview. And how were they supposed to meet without even setting a place? From the darkness, a heavy voice replied that locating a human was nothing to someone like him. Right after that, the sound of fingers snapping cut through the room. In the next instant, a blazing portal tore open inside the teenager's bedroom. He stared at the glow in terror, convinced his room had caught fire. But then, a shape began emerging from inside the flames. That only terrified the main character even more. The demon's deep voice shook the room as he calmly introduced himself. He claimed to be the ruler of the 20th Hell, a realm that was about to be created. His name was Baphomet. The protagonist could only let out a tired sigh. He figured depression and months of isolation had finally pushed him over the edge. Now he was apparently seeing ghosts. Footsteps approached as Baphomet grabbed his arm and lifted him, saying he was neither a ghost nor some hallucination. He had come because he wanted to use the boy's talent. The young man froze in shock. This was actually happening. He yanked himself from the demon's hold. He tried to stumble backward, but Baphomet told him to settle down, because if he refused to calm himself, the demon would tear out his brain and eat it to absorb his knowledge. Soon, two sat across from each other like they were in some bizarre job interview while the boy cracked open a can of soda. So he asked if this guy was really a demon. Baphomet answered that he was not only real, but one of the high-ranking demons. As if this were completely normal, he casually took a drink from the soda can. Then the young man asked if he had seen the Hellcraft map he made. Baphomet said he had and admitted the boy's skills impressed him. The map itself was not flashy. Still, even though escape was impossible, he had designed it to seem like there was hope ahead, a fake light at the end of the tunnel. Every bit of that false hope was cleverly built as a trap to torment the players, and despite its cruelty, the whole design still carried a strange sense of dignity. The main character listened while thinking that he had built that map from nothing but his own buried resentment. The demon explained that hell was running out of space and needed rapid expansion. Baphomet had been selected to rule this brand new hell. Because of that, he wanted the young man to become its creator. He wanted this new realm to resemble Hellcraft, or maybe become something even worse. The boy fell into deep thought, but he had no desire to get tangled up with a demon. He only wanted to keep living the way he was, even if that meant staying buried in all that trash. Baphomet questioned how anyone could be content with such a pathetic life. Then he said he still had one final offer. Since this new hell was only a projection, they would need test runs before its official opening. That detail immediately caught the boy's attention. The final proposal was simple. If he created the hell, he could freely lock any sinner he wanted inside it. The demon asked if he would not enjoy sending the people who betrayed him into a hell built by his own hands. At that moment, it looked like the young man had already chosen his path. Driven by weakness and hatred for everyone who had hurt him, he decided to become the new creator. He accepted the key being offered. If making a hell meant getting revenge on those insects, then he would do anything. Without even a second of hesitation, he seized the key like he had been waiting for it all along. Baphomet brought his hands together with satisfaction. From that moment forward, their contract was complete. After hearing those words, the boy surrendered to his resentment and inner weakness. Without thinking twice, he accepted the offer and struck a deal with the devil. Baphomet then asked what kind of hell he wanted to create. To build a true hell, two core conditions had to be met. The boy asked what those conditions were. First, every hell needed a crime or sin as its central theme, like the hell of greed, the hell of lies, and other cursed domains. Since greed and lies already existed, he needed a different sin to base it on. He had to choose a theme tied directly to the people he wanted to punish. The second rule was that the hell's design had to be impossible to escape. After all, hell existed to torment sinners for eternity. If any soul escaped, that hell would collapse, and its owner would be killed. In other words, if Yum Seungji's hell had even one flaw, Baphomet would pay the price. But the demon told him there was no need to worry. If a flaw appeared and he died, he would crush the young man's soul first. The main character swallowed hard for a second. Now it was finally time to begin. Baphomet snapped his fingers, and the entire world around them started shifting. The clouds turned blood red. Storm lightning tore across the city sky. One bolt crashed down toward the young man's house and surged straight into his computer. Little by little, the game on his screen began transforming into a completely new interface. As he used the game to design the new realm, the demon's minions built it in real time. It looked like everything on his computer had fully synced directly with hell itself. Now it was time for this human to prove what he could really do. A construction sign appeared, and Baphomet calmly watched the whole process unfold. He seemed seriously hooked on that soda. He kept drinking can after can. His subordinates were ready to start building. They were only waiting for the young man's command. An arrow appeared, and the foreman signaled the tiny minions. They rushed to one area and began stacking the structure block by block. Meanwhile, Baphomet kept watching the human from his room. Since their contract began, 7 days, 4 hours, and 37 minutes had passed in the human world. Without even sleeping properly, this guy was already shaping what looked like a magnificent castle. Was he naturally special, or had his hatred turned him into something extraordinary? The demon wondered about it and felt certain he had chosen well. Through Baphomet's screen, he heard the young man announce that the project was finished. He clapped and praised him. The human had created the hell he wanted far faster than expected. Now the only thing left was choosing its name, and the young man answered with one word: betrayal. This would become the hell for traitors. On the computer screen, the familiar question appeared once again. He clicked yes, and the new map, Hell of the Traitors, was saved. He stood up and left his room for the first time in months. Then he saw his stepmother standing in the kitchen. The time for revenge had finally arrived. Baphomet reminded him that only those guilty of betrayal could be sent into the hell he created. That was one of the strict conditions required for it to work. He understood that if the conditions were not met, the power would not activate. But if the key reacted, it would open the gates of hell and pull every sinner inside. The young man walked toward his stepmother. She was busy taking pictures of her new purse. Well, look who finally crawled out of his hole. You should take a shower, she said. You stink just like your mother, she added. He stared down at the key in his hand. It was not an easy decision. Since hell had only just been created, there was no chance anyone had committed a sin there yet. He would probably need to wait a few more days. But his stepmother kept acting nasty, asking why he had to leave his room whenever she was around. At the same time, she was busy choosing which purse photo to upload. The more she whined, the stronger his urge became to throw her into his hell immediately. After all, she was exactly the kind of trash who deserved punishment. At only 23, his mother had been sold off through a family-arranged marriage. Because of that, the poor woman spent her whole life suffering under her husband's relatives. Even then, she always smiled whenever the main character was near. Everything had fallen apart, and she was probably the one with the most reason to cry, yet she kept smiling. He could not stand listening to the arguments, and it hurt even more when his mother came out afterward wounded, while pretending nothing had happened. Eventually, she was pushed out of her own place at the table, and if love had been involved, it might have been easier to accept. Instead, she was replaced by a younger woman who clearly only cared about money, and worst of all, he often heard her insulting his father to her friends. That snake never even tried to hide it, and she even threatened him. If he did not want to be thrown out like his mother, he had better keep his mouth shut. She was just a parasite living off others, willing to ruin an entire family for her own comfort. He stayed there as her irritation kept rising, so he gathered his nerve and asked how much money it would take for her to leave his father. The woman stared at him, confused by the sudden question. He told her she did not need to fake anything around him, because it was obvious she was only with his dad for the cash. His stepmother was offended, wondering who this brat thought he was. Then he made a shocking offer, the $100 million his father had saved for college, and he knew exactly where the investment notebook was hidden. Altogether, it would add up to about $1 billion. Her eyes instantly sparked with greed when she heard that. If she did not believe him, he said he could prove it. Even though she was still suspicious, the stepmother hesitated. Then she stood up, followed him, and watched as he opened the safe. Until that moment, she had only dreamed about buying a few luxury things she wanted. Maybe she could even get property under her name, but if what this guy said was true, she would be set for life. He finished opening the safe, revealing gold bars, investment records, and a thick stack of cash. To convince her, he pulled out part of it and said she could use that money to start a new life overseas. Still, something felt off to her, because why would he suddenly do all this? Baphomet appeared, entertained by the scene, noting that even a woman like her still had a bit of instinct left. So what could they do now to make her fully accept the deal? It was time for the act, and with almost no effort, he started crying. He said he only wanted his mother to come back, and if that woman left, maybe his mother would return. Even the demon was shocked by the boy's performance, because he had played the perfect move and acted exactly like a helpless child. And for him, it was as easy as taking candy from one. She grabbed her purse and began cramming the money inside. Just as expected, she walked right into the trap like a clueless duck. With that, her betrayal against his father was complete. She asked for the bank and card passwords, but he said she would not need them where she was going. The woman turned toward him, completely confused. Then the key started glowing. He inserted it and turned it. Lightning burst through the room. The room distorted as a door appeared, followed by a sinister click as it swung open. Scaled tentacles emerged from nowhere. Then they began wrapping around the traitor. They dragged her straight into hell while she screamed in terror, but her screams quickly disappeared. The moment the door shut, the young man had sent a living person directly to hell. She fell into a concrete room with no possible escape. Suddenly, the walls began closing in, squeezing the space smaller and smaller. Baphomet watched it all through his viewer. He asked if the boy wanted to see it too, but the boy said he felt a little sick. The demon asked if guilt was finally hitting him, but he froze when he saw the human laughing. Yum-sung-gi hurriedly pulled on his school uniform. After being shut away for so long, he looked thinner than anyone expected. The demon stared in disbelief. Less than an hour after sending that woman to hell, this guy was already chasing his next target. The boy answered that as long as he held the sword, he would keep fighting. After all, hell without sinners was no hell at all. Doing it just for personal satisfaction might sound questionable, but in the end, Baphomet had to agree. The screams of the damned were what made hell real, and adding more souls only made it richer. The main character zipped up his backpack and got himself ready to leave. It had been 3 months since he last showed up at school, but he walked out without hesitation to hunt the next sinner. Step by step, the hell of betrayal was gaining more residents. This was becoming way more thrilling than he had imagined. Back at school in classroom 2, row 4, several students turned to look out the window. Someone joked, asking if a celebrity had arrived. Then someone answered that the missing guy was back, and nobody could believe it. He really had returned, even though everyone thought he had dropped out. Everyone wondered why he would come back now. But the real issue was obvious. The school gang would definitely target him again, and just as expected, they had no intention of ignoring his return. Everyone could feel the classroom atmosphere turning ugly again. They were nervous to see what would happen and how his comeback would shake things up. But the young men already had a plan for Kim Sung-hwan and his crew. They pushed the door open with their target already in sight. The leader sneered, saying the idiot actually came back. They surrounded him and said he should have warned them first. They would have prepared a proper welcome. Baphomet completely misread the situation, thinking the boy was popular, like some celebrity among the students. Sadly, that was nowhere close to the truth. One gang member tossed the protagonist's notebook onto the floor. He complained that because of him, his school record now had a stain. If he caused trouble, he had to pay for it. One of the boys warned him to come quietly, unless he wanted to become the whole class's entertainment. They all headed to the bathroom, about 5 against 1 in that cramped room. What a pathetic setup. The loudmouth kept whining about his school record. They tried to blame the beating on the victim, acting like Sung-hwan was just some unlucky guy dragged into the mess. As usual, he stayed silent and listened to all their nonsense. And right on cue, the first punch smashed straight into his face. That silence was seriously getting under the big guy's skin. Baphomet watched everything unfold like a brutal scene on a theater screen. So this was what humans called cornering the victim. Judging by how this was going, Baphomet said it would be hard to make any of them commit betrayal. So what would the boy do now? He wiped the blood from his mouth, and his goal was clear. He would send every one of them to hell. Just like the demon said, there was no trust between him and the bullies. That meant he could not trigger a sin of betrayal involving himself. But humans had always used tools and weapons to defeat creatures far stronger than them. He only needed to think smarter. And for this hunt, the strongest weapon he could use against them was surprisingly simple. The gang laughed when they saw him reach into his pocket, thinking he had brought a knife for self-defense. But then everyone froze. He pulled out 5,001 in cash. His weapon against the group was money, but bribing them would be pointless. They could simply beat him down and take the cash afterward. He said he would take the beating. That part was fine. But he added that what they were doing was seriously unfair. Baphomet grew excited as the scene started shifting. The main character threw the stack of money onto the floor. Other than taking the beating, he had only one request. Sung Hwan clenched his teeth and lunged into attack, but he was stopped halfway. The leader said they should hear him out since money was on the table. Just like the protagonist planned, they had swallowed the bait. He bent down and picked up the cash. If he could throw out 5 grand that easily, then he clearly had plenty more hidden away. So, what's the job, the leader asked. He shifted his gaze toward Kim Sung-hwan. Then he said he wanted them to beat that guy down. Everyone looked back at the same boy from earlier, now frozen in total disbelief. And if that cash was not enough, he still had more on him. Let's crush the guy who betrayed me back when we were supposedly friends. Yeom Seung-ji said it calmly. The bait was out, and the hunt had officially begun. A laugh rang out as the leader said maybe this fool was actually kind of entertaining. He shoved the money straight into his pocket. He mocked Kim Sung-hwan for that dramatic denial earlier, saying it looked like they really had been friends after all. Think of the next few minutes as a little payback performance, he added. The big guy moved in to grab the boy, but he slipped away from his arm and snapped back, asking what nonsense they were talking about. He insisted they were never friends and questioned why they would trust trash like that. Trash, the leader said shamelessly. We are just collecting a little cash from a friend. So what is so hard to get? Kim Sung-hwan could not process what he was hearing. He glared down at the boy on the floor with pure rage. Then he grabbed him by the collar and demanded to know who he thought he was, dragging him into this mess. He asked how he could pull something like that on a friend, then snapped that they were never even that kind of friends. But then the main character corrected him. Since they were childhood friends, it was only fair that they shared this nightmare together. The brown-haired boy lost it and lunged in to hit him, but someone stopped him cold by grabbing his collar. Then he was hurled to the side with brutal force. They had already been paid for the job, so now it was time to deliver. One of them tried to calculate the price per punch, figuring out how many hits would equal 5,000. He agreed to 501 per punch, which meant roughly 10 clean hits. Without wasting another second, they started counting each blow while he stood there watching. So this was what it felt like to watch someone else get physically humiliated. Strangely, the sound felt much softer than he remembered from when he was the one getting beaten. How irritating, he muttered. He could not understand why those guys enjoyed this so much. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the key. His plan was to create conflict inside the gang and make them turn on each other. Baphomet noted that this was a completely different tactic from the one he used on his stepmother. The human got ready to open the portal and called the gang's attention. They reacted like they had been shocked, all turning toward him at once. They demanded to know what he was doing. He simply answered that it was time to test how brave they really were. He inserted the key, and the portal began to take shape. He turned around as the iron door slowly opened. The tentacles returned, snatching them one after another. One by one, they were dragged inside, but one of them still tried to hang on. He had no intention of showing mercy. After all, the other students already called that leader a demon. Memories of everything they had done to him flashed through his mind. Every humiliation and every punch came rushing back. Every second of mental torture resurfaced. Now that piece of trash would probably feel right at home. He peeled the leader's final finger off the door, and just like that, the man was swallowed completely. The only one left was Kim Sung-hwan, trembling like a scared little chihuahua. He turned toward his former friend. Baphomet watched the two boys with growing curiosity. He slowly stepped forward while the other boy backed away in terror. Aren't you curious about what just happened? He asked. It might sound impossible, but he had just opened the gates of hell. He had only received that key a few hours earlier. Kim Sung-hwan then asked if he was going to be spared. In that instant, memories of their childhood together flashed through his mind. Back then, their days had been warm, simple, and genuinely happy. Then he snapped back to the present. He had no idea how the other guy saw him now, but even after everything, he still thought of him as a friend. So the beating from earlier was more than enough payback. Kim Sung-hwan admitted the other guy might not believe him, but he had been scared of those thugs too. Hearing that took a weight off his chest. Maybe, little by little, they could repair the friendship they had lost. The main character started to leave, but by accident he let the key fall to the floor. The moment Kim Sung-hwan saw it, he remembered what his friend had told him. He also remembered exactly what that key was capable of. Without a second thought, he lunged for the key and snatched it up. "You idiot. Don't act so righteous after sending them to beat me down," he snapped. But when he opened his palm to check the key, he realized it was nothing more than an ordinary key. Yeom Seung-gi had dropped his room key on purpose. The real key was still safely in his hand. In that moment, the other guy completely lost his shot at redemption, and another sinner was pulled into the hell of betrayal. Baphomet clapped, calling it one impressive performance. It had twists all the way to the final second, but he explained the last move was not a trap, it was a test. He had genuinely wanted to give his old friend one last chance. The one who betrayed him had now hit absolute rock bottom. Although in hell, rock bottom did not really exist. Everyone suffered equally there. Even so, things were about to get dull again. So it was time to stir up hell and make it chaotic once more. Yeom Seung-gi washed his face. He was still slowly accepting this strange new reality. The demon said he could not figure him out, and that made him even more fascinated. When he sent his stepmother to hell, the demon thought he was some vengeful monster, but after seeing him face his classmate, it looked like his emotions still reacted to the cruelty he had caused. Of course, the demon was the last being qualified to judge him, though some people might find that contradiction suffocating. Seung-gi turned off the water and spoke. He told Baphomet to relax because none of this was going to break his mind. The uneasiness inside him was not pity, and it definitely was not guilt. He only felt pathetic for not cutting those traitors out sooner and letting them destroy his life. The more he watched, the more this human surprised him. Baphomet was genuinely impressed. He had clearly chosen the right person. The sun began to sink over the city, and at last the young man made it back home. Still, he could not exactly call the place normal. After all, a demon had his head sticking out of the living room window in the least normal way possible. It looked like he was watching someone enter the building. Once the demon confirmed who it was, he announced that the young man's father had arrived. The young man stayed quiet, lost in thought. Baphomet was thrilled, eager to see what kind of trap he would set next. After all, there clearly was not much trust between him and his father, especially since he had shut himself away for nearly 6 months. And a money trap would not work either, since the cash he had used belonged to the old man. The main character said he had no plan to use that kind of trap. He already knew it would fail. Then they both heard someone unlock the door and step into the apartment. Baphomet was practically begging him to spoil the next move. The door opened just a crack. Apparently his father ran a small insurance company, and that company charged extremely high premiums. In other words, he made money by refusing payouts to customers who faithfully paid for expensive insurance. His father walked in and asked who he was talking to. Then he sneered, saying that locking himself in his room playing games was bad enough, but now he had gone schizophrenic too. The old man sneered that he was turning into a failure, just like his mother. Yeom Seung-gi stared at the key shining inside his pocket. Then he raised it toward Baphomet. Just like he had said, he did not need any trap to deal with his father. Today, that man had betrayed yet another victim. After hearing his son's words, the old man moved to punish him. But before the slap could fully come down, the main character opened the portal. He had spent years wondering why his father abandoned his mother, and why the man treated his own son with so much cruelty. It felt like denying people their rights for so long had made betrayal second nature to him. The young man finished twisting the key, and the iron gate slowly opened again. His father could not understand what was happening, but it only took a moment. Just one final goodbye, and another sinner was dragged into the hell he had personally earned. The old man begged to be released, but his son told him there was no way out where he was going. The gate slammed shut, leaving only the faint echoes of screams behind them. Baphomet stared at the prison where the man had been sent. Aside from the sounds coming from his screen, the entire room fell silent. He stood up and walked over to a fallen picture frame on the shelf. It was an old family photograph. The demon anxiously asked if his revenge was finished and what he planned to do next. His revenge was done, and a twist no one's humming. He said it was time to surrender to the police. Later, at the station, he confessed everything he had done to the officers. Baphomet stayed right beside him. Then, out of nowhere, a portal opened and one of his subordinates stepped through. Apparently, Lucifer wanted an audience with him. Most likely, it was about the new hell that had just been created. He stood and opened the portal, heading off to speak with the boss. The castle of the King of Hell came into view, and a council of 11 demons was already waiting for Baphomet. The doors swung open as he entered the massive hall. A calm, elegant voice echoed through the room, saying all 12 had finally arrived. That voice belonged to none other than Lucifer himself, the King of Hell. Lucifer sat on his throne, watching the master of the 20th Hell enter. Baphomet scanned the chamber. He wondered why all 12 demons, who usually hated being together, had gathered in one place before Lucifer. The king told him to sit. He walked to his chair, but before taking a seat, he asked for an explanation since he had arrived last. Lucifer had no patience for questions and ordered him to sit down. A magic circle flared open, and Baphomet was forcefully pulled into his chair. Everyone was only sitting there because Lucifer had ordered it. None of them came by choice. That was Gargamon, one of the high-ranking demons. It seemed they were about to discuss new rules for the hells, and not a single demon in the room looked pleased about it. The king said he had given each of them a chance to create their own hell, but like any contract, he had never stated that they would actually own those hells. In other words, he never promised their creations would become official hells. A woman named Lizanne spoke up, saying the hells they built would be their responsibility, but they would not be recognized as official hells. Lucifer confirmed that was exactly right, and the most fascinating part was that none of them had built their hell alone. Every one of them had recruited an interesting human to help shape it. Baphomet had assumed the others lacked his vision, but now he realized their choices actually made sense. After all, the most legendary hell ever made was the Hell of Disbelief, designed by Dant, a human. A strange eye began shifting, almost like it wanted to speak. That was Sadius, another high-ranking demon, and he wanted to know what Master Lucifer was planning. He said the answer was simple. He would pick the strongest hell to become the official one, and every other hell would be wiped out. Everyone froze when they heard that. Their worst fear had just been confirmed. Lucifer wanted the creators of those hells to clash in a brutal survival battle. Back at the police station, Yeom Sung-ji was now sitting inside the interrogation room. He had come there to throw the investigation into chaos, reporting that his father and stepmother had vanished. But things did not play out the way he planned. A report had also come in about a group of bullies disappearing. Their terrified parents were begging the police to find their kids. In the end, 6 people had vanished from the same neighborhood in a single day, and the main character was the only connection between them. So why had he been so reckless from the beginning? Why did he make everything happen within just 1 or 2 days? The reason was painfully clear. There was simply no way to prove he was guilty. The only thing tying the cases together was his connection to the missing people. Not one living witness had seen him open the gates of hell, and there was definitely no evidence like weapons, bodies, or anything physical left behind. Missing people often share connections, but the law cannot convict someone on that alone. The young man smiled, knowing he would probably walk free soon. The junior investigator told his superior that no matter what they tried, they still had no evidence against the boy. What could they even do? An amateur like him should not have been able to erase every trace so perfectly. But with things as they were, Detective Chief Park Sang-sik said they had no choice but to release him. Before that, though, he wanted one last talk with the kid and told his subordinate to turn off the microphone. He opened the interrogation room door and apologized for dragging him through all this right after his parents disappeared. Park Sang-sik threw out some bait, saying they were not doing this by choice and that he believed the boy had not killed anyone. The young man stayed silent, because technically he really had not killed anyone. He had only sent them to hell. Then he froze, shocked to hear his own voice, because he was sure the thought had never left his head. But right in front of him, the detective was holding a strange key that looked just like his. Park Sang-sik asked if that surprised him. It seemed the young man was not the only human chosen by a commander from hell. The boy was genuinely stunned, because this was the last twist he expected. The detective admitted he was surprised too, though he never thought the confession would slip out that easily. He stepped closer to the boy. As the young man wrestled with his thoughts, he realized that man's instincts were dangerously sharp. He could not tell whether the detective knew something or had simply gambled and caught him off guard. But none of that mattered, because one fact was clear. As they locked eyes, the young man decided that if needed, he could just send this guy to hell like the rest. Twisting the detective's betrayal sin should not be that difficult. Suddenly, both of them flinched as a portal ripped open. Baphomet appeared right in the middle of the interrogation room. Then another portal opened on the opposite side. Gargamon stepped through with a dramatic entrance. The young man was stunned to see yet another demon. Gargamon smirked and said it looked like they had met again. As everyone could see, the humans chosen by the 2 demons had already crossed paths. The masked demon said it was nice to meet again, but Baphomet needed to keep his pet under control. After all, his little nerd looked ready to open the gates of hell at any second. The horned demon told his human to calm down, since the real game had not even started yet. The young man demanded to know what was happening, because he never imagined there were other humans like him. Baphomet said he had not expected it either, but just like him, the other demons seemed to be using humans to build their own hells, and only one of the 12 created hells would stand as the winner. The death game was about to begin. Gargamon told the detective to release the boy for now, since letting him move freely could help eliminate other opponents and shrink the competition. The detective said he had already planned to let him go, because legally there was no way to prove the kid's crimes. Besides, he was using Hell's power too, which made him just as guilty as the boy. Baphomet added that they were still human, and that made them useful pieces in this dark fantasy game. Gargamon was right though. If they used their powers too soon, surviving until the end would become almost impossible. If they allowed it, Baphomet still had a lot to explain to his human. The detective opened the door, then the two of them walked out together. The young man looked furious after learning that other humans like him existed. Back in the room, the hand-holding man told Park Sang-sik not to worry. His hell was already better than the other two, so for now, they would use the others as bait and crush them when needed. Park Sang-sik declared he would do anything to survive until the end, because only then could a truly fair society be built. By the time Yeom Seung-gi made it home, night had already fallen. He dropped onto his bed, rattled by the fact that the other guy had not only figured out his ability, but was also another hell creator. The young man yelled that he could have been arrested, or even worse, thrown straight into hell. Baphomet told him to stop being dramatic, since he was the one who chose to walk into the police station and confess. The main character tried blaming Baphomet, saying the demon never warned him about other humans like him, but before he could keep complaining, the demon grabbed his face, then slammed him hard against the wall. He needed to watch his tone. This was not some random monster, but a high-ranking demon who could snatch his soul in an instant. The boy gulped in fear, then Baphomet released him. The demon was furious too, because he had no idea Lucifer had commanded the other demons to build their own hells as well. And he definitely did not know Lucifer planned to make all 12 of them battle to decide whose hell was the greatest. His anger toward Lucifer's decision was written all over his face. The young man asked about this death game, trying to confirm whether the only goal was surviving until the very end. Baphomet asked if this human honestly believed he could pull that off. But first, the young man had to understand the rules and learn what happened while he was stuck being questioned at the police station. The demon agreed and said he would show him directly. He lifted 2 fingers toward the young man's eyes. The pain made him curse out loud. Unfortunately, this painful method was still faster than explaining everything. His vision went black, then a glow appeared. Soon, the image of a man began forming before his eyes, and suddenly Lucifer was standing right in front of him. The young man could see every detail clearly, almost like he had been dragged into that exact moment. Someone raised a hand and praised Lucifer's hunger for war as a brilliant idea. That demon was Lam, the flaming eagle. But to prepare properly, Lam continued. They first needed to understand the rules of the game. Lucifer seemed to consider it. What he truly wanted was for the chosen humans to fight each other and send one another to hell. None of you know which sin is connected to another demon's hell, just like your humans know nothing either. Control your chosen humans and make them lay traps that drag their enemies into hell. Lam explained that. In other words, this was a deadly game of tag where no one knew their enemies, and the last survivor would win. Lucifer accepted that demon's explanation. This way, they could discover which hell was truly universal and how original a human-made hell could become. Lam raised his hand again and asked whether there were any rules beyond that. The king answered that demons could not use their own powers to assist the humans. Everything else was permitted. As long as the humans were the ones sending each other to hell, the vision faded away. Then he was back in reality. Now he understood why it was called the game of death. There was no real escape. Even if he refused to hunt, someone would eventually come hunting for him. Baphomet agreed and said the same rule applied to him. After all, each demon was bound to their own hell by contract. That meant every human and demon would vanish together, except for the single winner. It was way too much information to take in at once. But honestly, the young man did not care at all whether Baphomet survived. If he was dragged into someone else's hell, he would simply see it as his karma catching up. Only one question bothered him, so he decided to ask Baphomet directly. What would happen to the people locked inside his hell if he ended up trapped in an enemy's hell? The answer was simple. They would disappear too. So there was no easy escape. The young man had to go all out, because he refused to let those imprisoned bastards die peacefully. Baphomet actually shivered when he heard that. The human he chose was completely unhinged. This guy did not want to survive for himself, but to make sure his sinners kept suffering. Eternal torment was the true core of hell. There was no way he could allow the hell he created to collapse. Whether it was right or wrong, Baphomet felt lucky to have a human like him on his side. Maybe becoming the master of a brand new hell was not such an impossible dream after all. The demon reached out his hand and acknowledged him as his partner. Then the two gave each other a salute, but from far away it looked like someone was watching them closely. Sadias and his human, Hu Min-chi, stood on top of a building, observing them from a distance. It looked like the real death game was finally about to begin. The young man wrote the rules down on a sheet of paper. In short, there were 4 rules. Rule 1, victory is decided when one creator imprisons another. Rule 2, demons may help, but they cannot use their powers. Rule 3, any method is allowed. Rule 4, the game continues until only one winner remains. Unless Lucifer suddenly changed his decision and added new restrictions. Those were the current rules. That led to the first big question. How far could demons actually assist them? And besides their authority, what powers did they possess? Yeom Seung-gi asked. The so-called authority was the power Lucifer had granted to every demon. For example, they could travel through portals. They could also release hellfire from their bodies. And they had the ability to control lesser demons. But beyond that authority, every demon also had a personal innate skill they were born with. The main character got curious and asked what Baphomet's natural ability was. Baphomet said his gift was sensing death. Ever since he was young, he could detect people nearing death and guide their souls down to hell. Interested, the young man asked him to explain exactly how that power worked. Just then, the doorbell suddenly rang. He was not expecting any visitors. When he checked the intercom, he saw a girl standing outside his door. She told him she had something she wanted to show him. Not understanding what she meant, he hesitantly said yes. Then, out of nowhere, she started unbuttoning her blouse. Completely caught off guard, he asked what she thought she was doing and warned her that she was about to cross a line. He told her to leave immediately before he called the police. Then he cut off the intercom. Baphomet poked his head out from his room. At that moment, a dark miasma began spreading through the area. It was the aura of death, exactly like Baphomet had described earlier. The woman on the intercom had come there to kill the main character. The young man was stunned when he heard that, but his mind quickly started working. He had been living quietly and had done nothing that would make a stranger target him, so there was only one explanation. That woman had to be another hell creator. Hu Min-chai pulled the glowing key from her pocket. His reaction had been enough to activate the sin of lust. She slipped the key back into her pocket. Now all she needed to do was smash through the door, invade his home, and drag her opponent into hell. To be safe, the girl checked with her demon first. Sadius simply gave her a confirming nod. His observation skills were seriously impressive, since he had found another creator faster than she expected, and because the target had not come outside, all she had to do was break in and end it. Hu Mincha lifted her hammer and started slamming it against the door. The main character was shocked by how bold she was, because this girl was literally hammering down his door. He had to come up with a counter fast, because her key had definitely been activated. It did not take long for him to figure out her linked sin was lust. The pounding at the door kept going without stopping. He grabbed his own key and desperately searched for a plan. When he answered the intercom, he had no idea she was one of his enemies too. That meant he had no chance to prepare ahead of time. But could her trick count as betrayal? Baphomet explained that her action was still too minor to qualify as a real sin. For the key to activate, the opponent had to completely abandon their faith. A casual deception like that did not amount to betrayal, even if she had done it on purpose. Hell's rules were not that forgiving. But since the young man looked strangely calm, Baphomet asked if he had another move ready. Another heavy hammer strike crashed against the door. If the enemy had already activated her key and was trying to enter his house. The protagonist said this while walking toward the door until he stood right in front of it. He needed to make her believe he could unleash his power the instant that door opened. The young man sat down in front of the door and warned the woman outside that if she entered, she would be sent straight to hell. For a moment, she hesitated in confusion, but she decided he was bluffing and kept smashing the door with her hammer. The girl proved his guess right, since she was forcing her way in, because she had already met the conditions to open her hell's door. At last, she managed to break the doorknob. The main character warned her one more time, saying that if she stepped inside, she would fall directly into his hell. Hu Minch had not expected this at all. He was not begging, and he was not hiding. She started wondering if his warning might actually be true. Just like he predicted, she snapped at the bait without hesitation. He asked if she wanted to know why he had not tried to run. Then he explained that the hell he controlled was tied to invasion. She peered through the hole in the door, and their eyes locked. The truth was it was only a half bluff, but he had to work with whatever cards he still had. Nothing in Lucifer's rules said a player could not lie about the theme of their own hell. Baphomet stared at him in admiration, amazed that he had built a trap in such a short time. But as a highly intelligent human, the girl also understood there was a strong chance he was lying. The odds of it being a bluff were definitely above 90%. But what if it was real? What if opening the door truly triggered the condition for the young man's hell? She pictured that outcome and decided she did not want this deadly game ending right there. Silence settled in as she weighed every possible result. Option 1. Put her key into the lock and activate her own hell. In exchange, though, she might also set off her enemy's condition. Option 2. Back off. But if she retreated, the other player would never fall for the same trick again. The main character would remember this attack and figure out the activation condition for her hell. In short, it could turn into a future checkmate. Every choice came with a serious risk. So what was her best move? It felt like he could read her thoughts as he calmly pointed out every doubt and possibility running through her mind. Then he presented an option that supposedly helped both of them. That option was an alliance. She laughed at the idea, since only one person could win this game, meaning any alliance would eventually end in betrayal. He kept pressing her, asking if she really believed she could handle the other 10 participants alone. That question made her pause. Realistically, she could not use today's same tactic on every other player. Worse, he might team up with someone else and reveal the sin behind her hell to the other players. If that happened, her surprise attacks would be useless. Unsure of what to do, she asked Sadius for the best choice. But the demon admitted he did not know the right answer either. Before she could think any longer, he gave her his phone number and said that if she wanted an alliance, she only had to call. That way, she would not trigger his hell's condition. Since she had smashed the door, the police were probably already coming, so she needed to leave fast. Even though she still was not completely convinced, the girl took out her phone. Then she saved the number he had given her. Things clearly had not gone according to her plan. Apparently her opponents were just as sharp as she was. He kept the act until she finally left. Then the mask dropped. The game had barely started, and he had already come dangerously close to elimination. Baphomet said he had suspected a demon might have the ability to locate other users, but he never expected them to be targeted first. More importantly, the young man truly deserved credit. His fast thinking had shocked him yet again. They continued talking while planning their next move. While adjusting his hell through the game system, a message suddenly appeared on his phone. The girl had agreed to form a temporary alliance with him. He stared at the screen, thinking that surviving today was already a win. If she exposed their alliance or revealed his power, he could trigger his hell of betrayal. It was honestly a genius move. Meanwhile, at the police station, Detective Park Sang-sik was going through confidential files. He looked completely absorbed in his search for other creators like himself. Gargamon asked if he planned to use his power for that, saying it might not be a bad idea. But with so many missing people, using his ability was far more complicated than it sounded. Someone entered his office and asked if he was leaving already. The detective questioned why his assistant was there so late. The young man answered that he was just restocking a few things. He opened the drawer and placed his bag inside. Then he casually mentioned that earlier, they had received a report about an attempted break-in at the main character's house. Apparently, some unstable student had tried to invade his home. By the time the police arrived, the victim was safe, and the girl was already gone. At last, the detective had a lead. He was certain the girl who attacked the house was another Hell creator. Who would have guessed that nerd was actually doing this well? He ordered them to check the camera footage and identify the girl who attacked the property. Besides the footage, the detective had another request. He wanted his subordinate to monitor the boys' movements for the entire week, but while the players who knew each other's identities were studying one another. Elsewhere in the city, the first elimination took place. An old man knelt on the ground while a well-dressed man stood before him. It looked like the man still standing was Jam's player. The old man begged the young man to spare his life. He cried to his demon, insisting he was not someone who deserved punishment for sin. But the sharply dressed man stepped closer and said that sometimes just existing is the sin. To him, the old man wasting oxygen with such a worthless life was completely unforgivable. Even while he pleaded desperately for mercy, the gates of hell opened wide and dragged his soul inside. His demon started fading away. The demon said Jam had gotten lucky this time, but before he could finish, the human crushed the pink demon under his foot and called him useless. Jam told him to stop because whether he liked it or not, the demon beneath his shoe was an upper rank being from hell. But the man showed zero fear and told him that if he wanted to avoid the same fate, he should do his job properly. The half-eagle demon froze in disbelief, wondering if he had really heard a human say that. Then the human took it back with a laugh, saying he was only joking since they were partners. Now only 10 participants remained. If they captured every last one, their twisted utopia would finally be born. 3 days had passed since the Fabiana incident. Yeom Seung-ji used that time to rest like he was enjoying a work vacation. Baphomet watched him closely, trying to figure out what kind of strategy this human was planning. 3 days earlier, they had survived 2 rivals and even built an alliance, yet somehow they had done absolutely nothing since. If they wanted to win this deadly system-style game, shouldn't they be moving already? The main character said he understood the frustration, because he was not the type to sit around either, so the waiting was getting to him too. The demon asked why he looked so calm if that was the case. First of all, a game like this kept escalating, and near the end there would be no time to rest or gather intel. In other words, once the real battle began, neither of them would get proper sleep, because they would always be either the hunter or the hunted. Second, if he was already losing patience, then someone else would definitely slip up, since idiots always chased a single battle instead of winning the whole war. So he planned to start hunting only after an aggressive player wandered into one of his traps. Just then, his phone began ringing. It seemed Hu Minchai was calling. Over the phone, she snapped that 3 days had passed since their alliance, yet he had not contacted her once. He answered that he had been doing nothing on purpose, waiting for someone to trigger the sin of invasion. She sighed in annoyance and said that while he had gone completely off the grid, something had already happened. Apparently, a suspicious post had blown up on Streamer, and he needed to check it immediately. Hu Minchai sent him the link so he could watch the video too. A streamer named Gaka appeared on the screen, claiming during his live stream that he was part of some kind of game. And it was not just any game, but something close to the Hunger Games. None of the participants knew each other's identities, and since everyone seemed to be hiding until someone moved first, the game had become painfully boring. As a thrill-seeking creator, he expected this death game to have way more screams, chases, and action, so he decided to reveal his own identity first, hoping that would finally kick things off. Then the participants could either steal his key or hunt the other players who came after him. He invited everyone to his house that very night at midnight, and dropped the exact location in the comments. Baphomet and the young man stared at the phone, unable to believe what they had just watched. This was exactly what they had been waiting for, and now it was time to make the first move. In an event like this, they could expose other players and possibly count the number of competitors. It looked like the vacation was officially over. In a cafe at the center of the city, the main character waited for Hu Minchai. She arrived complaining about how he looked and asked if he picked such a crowded place just to stop her from attacking him. He fired back that he had left his own home to meet her, which actually put him at a disadvantage, because he could not activate the sin of invasion. She sat down and went straight to business, asking what they should do about the streamer's invitation, since regular viewers and other creators like them had probably seen it too. At least 1 or 2 players would likely show up, so they needed the best possible strategy. The young man considered his next move, not wanting her to uncover the real activation condition behind his sin. He chose to say he would go, even if his sin would not be very effective, because it was still a good chance to identify other players. That was honestly a solid plan, as long as they checked the location the moment the address appeared in the comments. But before they could continue, something completely unexpected happened. Detective Park Sang-sik entered the cafe with his demon Gargamon. The main character wondered why the detective had shown up there. Hugh Min-chai turned around and found herself face to face with another player. The detective smiled at both of them, saying it was almost adorable to see them plotting their next move out in public. For a brief moment, both young players were hit with pure panic. They traded nervous looks, but the detective did not seem hostile. Still, they could not help wondering how long he had been watching them. They also wondered how he dared approach without even knowing their sins. Had they triggered his key's condition and put themselves one step from hell? Park Sang-sik finished the drink that had belonged to Yeom Seong-gi. Then he told them to drop whatever plan they were about to carry out. He warned that if they kept going, both of them would be dragged straight into hell on the spot. Meanwhile, over at streamer Gagaka's house, he checked his video's reach and made sure the address had been typed correctly. At that point, all he needed to do was upload it and wait. His demon Jin Jiang asked if they were seriously going through with this plan. The boy grinned with excitement and confirmed they were absolutely doing it. After all, he had already set every camera exactly where it needed to be. Besides, Jin Jiang's ability was not useful for much else. And just like that, the first major event in this deadly system-style game began, with Gagaka's strategy fully prepared. Back at the cafe, the three of them stayed seated without moving an inch. His key was glowing, meaning someone had committed the sin required to activate his power. But when exactly could that have happened? Ever since the video announced the games, he had been careful not to commit even one sin. Yeom Seong-gi suddenly remembered one important detail. At the police station, his key had not reacted when he showed it, so maybe it had been responding to Hu Minch instead of him. He looked at the woman in front of him, and suddenly his breathing hitched. A sharp theory started forming in his head. The main character tried to get Hu Minchi's attention, but Park Sang-sik cut him off, looking like he had something to say. Even then, the young man rose from his seat. The detective gave him one final warning, but the young man said he was only bluffing. If his theory was right, the detective had threatened someone into committing a sin, then used that opening to approach them. If neither he nor Hu Min-chai had sinned, the detective had to be bluffing. And with a real sinner inside the cafe, everything lined up. That was why his key was active here. On top of that, the young man had never seen the detective check his own key after entering the cafe. He spotted a clearly nervous man sitting nearby, and the bell on that table looked like it had only recently appeared. He walked straight to the man and asked point blank if Park Sang-sik had threatened him into entering the cafe. Hu Min-chai shot to her feet in anger once she realized the whole thing had been staged, and our protagonist knew his theory had been right. "Who do you think you are, treating us like this?" the girl snapped. The man who had been used took the chance to confirm it with the detective. Then he rushed out of the cab. Park Sang-sik gave a small smile. That reaction sent a chill through the young man. The detective said the boy had really grown. Or maybe during their last meeting, the boy had been so shaken that he accidentally revealed too much. What was this guy really trying to set up? Then the detective stood and said it had all been a test. After all, he had no interest in teaming up with two fools. Even so, the young man did not relax and kept watching him with suspicion. In a friendly voice, the detective asked the two young players to sit back down and hear his offer. As if the tension had vanished, the detective casually drank from Hu Minch's coffee like this was the most normal scene in the world. She asked the nerd if they were really going to hear the detective out, especially when they barely had any time left. But the reason the young man had not already stood up and walked away was because this guy was still a detective. That meant he could track down hell creators like them through police case records. He might also be able to use his public authority to detain someone or restrict their movements by force. In short, players like them with only one real card to play were at a serious disadvantage against the detective. He had two cards, not one. So an alliance made sense, and with the upcoming battle ahead, adding another sharp mind to the team could be a major advantage. The young man made his move and said he would accept an alliance if the detective revealed his sin, but asking for someone's sin was not something they could simply hand over like a free item in a dungeon raid. Hu Mincha pointed out that forming an alliance without knowing each other's sins was a terrible idea. The detective replied that instead of exposing his sin, he had some extremely valuable information to offer them. Whether they liked it or not, both of them were clearly tempted by the deal. The detective kept talking and asked if the number of people they had dragged to hell was still below 10. After all, he had already sent 117 people there himself. As expected, Yum Sung-ji and Hu Min-chai were stunned by that reveal, but their loud reaction bothered the cafe customers, so they quickly apologized. By sending that many victims to hell, he had gathered solid data on how key activation worked. That included how long the key stayed active and how much distance it could cover. He had even figured out how many targets could be sent at once, and every capture gave him more clues. His offer was simple. He would share that intel if the two teamed up with him for the battle happening that night. Naturally, the pair accepted the deal and left the cafe. Gargamon appeared again and asked if the detective had revealed too much for a simple alliance, especially after working so hard to collect it. But he told the demon not to worry, because the notebook he gave them had several key numbers altered, and if those two ever turned on him, he could swallow them both in one move. Later that night in a city park, the two allies waited for the announcement revealing Gagaka's location. There were still 3 hours and 20 minutes left before the official reveal. While they waited, it was the perfect time to talk strategy and teamwork. The main character got her attention and said he had a few questions. He wanted to know about her key's power and whether she could use it right now. If they found Gagaka first, they could gain an edge before the other players arrived. In response, the young woman picked up a stick. Then she began sketching on the ground. She explained that her demon skill could locate the nearest demon, meaning she could only track the closest player's demon within a limited range. That was why she had found him that night. He had been the closest player inside her detection radius. He asked how often she could activate it, and she answered that it worked every 12 hours for 5 minutes. Since she knew he would stay at home the whole time, she had probably been using her ability every 12 hours while moving around the city. Most likely after their first clash, she avoided contacting other players out of caution, so he figured she had tracked more people but had kept that information hidden. She had wanted to keep those details to herself, but during the CAF incident he protected her, so returning the favor was only fair. The young woman took a deep breath, then slowly let it out. Her search had given her 2 results. One target had been at the airport immigration gate, the other had been inside a meeting room at QS Corporation. In other words, one player was probably a foreigner, while the other seemed to be a high-ranking figure in the QS conglomerate. Unfortunately, neither one looked into a mirror during her 5-minute window, so she still had no idea what either of them looked like. To be clear, she said she had not hidden it because she distrusted him. She had honestly forgotten, and she had no intention of ruining their alliance. He thanked her and said that, to build more trust, he would reveal a little more about his own power. Baphomet's ability was to sense the essence of death. For him, it warned him when someone intended to kill, so with the right timing, it could almost predict the future. She said that was actually a strong skill, especially when paired with the sin in his key. Now that they understood each other better, and still had 3 hours before the official release, splitting up to rest before the coming battle was the smartest move. She agreed, and he said he would send her a photo of the detective's notebook so she could study it too. He lifted his hand for a friendly high five and told her to survive. After all, just like him, she probably did not want her prisoners getting an easy death. That made her remember why her sin was tied to lust. In a room, a phone sat on a desk with its camera already recording. A young man appeared on the screen, while the girl in the background asked why the camera was on. He said the adrenaline would make it fun. Then he begged her to do it just this once for him. The next day at school, 2 guys suddenly began hunting her down. Her locker was covered in vile insults, making it painfully obvious what had really happened. A man nervously rubbed his hands together. Her ex stood in front of her, apologizing and begging her for mercy. But she told him it was far too late. The damage was already done, and her family had been destroyed because of him. She snapped back to the present and admitted that he was right. She refused to let the people trapped in her hell die that easily. The two shared a quick, friendly high five. Then they promised each other they would survive until the very end. Yeom Seung-gi was studying the notebook from the detective and carefully writing down his thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, Baphomet appeared inside his room. The demon begged this human to stop making him walk everywhere because his feet were killing him. After all, he was used to traveling through portals, not trudging around like a normal person. The main character told him to quit complaining since other creators could also see demons. That meant Baphomet had to stay hidden unless he wanted to get exposed instantly. Seeing how cautious he was, the demon asked if he was not trusting Sadia's partner a little too much. He said it was fine because he had lied about his true sin. More importantly, they needed her power for the coming battle. This was clearly going to be a numbers game, and the other demons had probably already formed alliances. Elsewhere in the city, Lam and 2 other demons were walking together, proving the young man's theory right. Those 3 were Lam, Bamfir and Gordon Kilius, but their alliance was nothing like the team formed by the main character, Hu Min-chai, and Park Sang-sik. Yu Nung-han was obviously the one in charge, treating the other 2 like underlings. And Yoon-hai and John Jong-cheol were clearly being used as his subordinate. He kept refreshing Gaka's video feed over and over. At last, the address finally appeared. Yu Nung-han called out to John Jong-cheol, then he tossed a key straight into his hands. He ordered him to drive them to the location. He also told the kneeling girl that she would be the first one to enter the place Gagaka had pointed them toward. and Yunhai asked why she had to go in first, but before she could say more, he showed her the glowing key. He told her it was because she was useless, and because her life belonged to him. That threat clearly shook her. In her mind, this was all her own fault. Having to obey a bastard like him was absolutely miserable. John Zhongqiel asked if they would be free once the task was finished. Yu Nunghen replied that he would release them anytime, as long as they became useful people, so they had nothing to worry about. And with that, every participant began heading for the location Gagaka had posted. The deadly game was about to begin. At night, the city looked strangely peaceful without the daytime crowds filling the streets. The main characters group had gathered near a parking lot. They were going over the details written in the detective's notebook. According to the rules, they could pull only up to 5 people into hell at once. After the hell gate closed, it needed a 1-minute cooldown before it could open again. The gate could only reach 10 meters from its center. Even if they could see the target, anyone outside that range would not be dragged in. Hu Minchai pointed out that he had forgotten one important detail. Even if the key judged someone as a sinner, they would not be pulled in unless the creator personally recognized that person's sin. In other words, the hell gate needed 2 conditions to activate. The target had to commit a sin, and the creator had to acknowledge them as a sinner. Since the team had studied the rules thoroughly, their first objective was to find and identify the other players. Their second goal was to gather clues about each opponent's sin. And third, all 3 of them had to survive. No matter how tempting it was to cut down the player count, getting out alive came first. Hu Minchai asked if they really should avoid taking risks to reduce the number of players. Park Sang-sik answered that there was no reward for sending other players to hell, so the risk was not worth it. Still, if a clean chance appeared to eliminate someone, they would use everything they had. He handed 2 walkie-talkies to the younger pair. That would let them communicate faster and warn each other if another user appeared. Meanwhile, in front of a luxury hotel, a car stopped nearby, and Yu Nunghen watched the enemy's movements through binoculars. Did they really have to enter first? They had no idea where an attack might come from. It seemed smarter to wait for other participants and let them take the first risks. Their boss was already annoyed by all the complaining. They had come there to reduce the number of players as much as possible. And as the 2 already knew, Yu Nunghan had previously sent another player to hell. From that experience, he learned that sending a creator to hell granted an extra ability. The 2 stared at him in complete disbelief. If that was true, gaining an extra ability at the start would be a massive advantage. In this brutal system-like game, the more cards you collected, the better your odds became. Soon, the 2 subordinates realized that if they eliminated another player, they might finally break free from Yu Nunghan. Or at the very least, they could climb up to his level. Just as planned, those 2 walked straight into his trap like total amateurs. If that kind of reward actually existed, the game master would have announced it himself. He thinks back to what happened right after the demon vanished from his final battle. He asked Lam whether any bonus had appeared for him. Lam said he had not heard about any new system rules, and he felt no change either. That meant they did not need to personally kill other players, so their whole strategy had to change. The plan was simple. He would turn those 2 players into bait and let the newly appeared contestant take them out. By doing that, he could study the sin behind the enemy's hell. Once he had that information, he could force the new player into becoming his slave. Then he would keep repeating that method until the game reached its final stage. And at the very end, he would kill his last slave and claim the final victory. He lets out a quiet cough, trying to keep his face from giving anything away. Then he keeps talking, insisting that everything he is doing is meant to make his allies stronger. Now all they had to do was fasten the cameras to their clothes and move out for battle. Meanwhile, Gagaka was watching the surveillance footage he had set up across key locations. Then, without warning, 2 shadows appeared outside his window. The window opens and a woman steps in, asking if the little kitty really expected her to ring the bell first. From the look of it, she had used some kind of climbing rope to break in. Her key was already glowing, which meant the attack could begin. Yunhai lifts the key and commands the gates of the Hell of Vanity to open. A swarm of bats starts gathering around her. It was finally time for that brat to receive his judgment. A massive bat moves into position. Then she turns the key. As its wings spread wide, the portal opens. Hands stretch toward the target and lock him down. But the next second, they suddenly start pulling back. Both the woman and her demon are left stunned. What just happened? It made no sense for the key to fail like that. Then, a deep voice begins echoing from the direction of their target. She could not believe her eyes. They had gone after the wrong person entirely. As the mask comes off, another demon is revealed underneath. Neither of them knew something like that was possible. And before they could even react, his Hell of Invasion activates. Green smoke starts spreading through the room. Then a rope wraps around them. The girl and her demoness are dragged straight into that hell. In an instant, everything turns pitch black. Then, inside a dance studio, the sound of a countdown rings out. 3 girls are in the middle of rehearsal. Carla checks her phone watching another group of girls dance while wondering how much longer she will stay stuck as a trainee. Suddenly, noise erupts from the other side of the room. A man announces that the girl beside him, Yule, is going to debut. Yoonhai is completely shaken by the announcement. She asks why that girl gets to debut ahead of the others who trained with her. He says the decision came from the higher-ups, so there is nothing he can do about it. Instead of complaining, he tells her she'd celebrate with the other girls. Whether she accepted it or not, the news crushed her. Then someone walks up to her holding a tissue. It was Yule, and at first the young woman thought she was showing sympathy for her pain. But in truth, Yule tells her to work harder for the next evaluation. After 7 years as a trainee, maybe she simply did not have the talent. Maybe it was time to give up on becoming an idol, since she was getting too old for it. In that moment, Yule exposed herself as a complete snake. Later, at a convenience store on a rainy night, the devastated girl drinks away her sadness while watching that awful rival make her debut. She had learned that Yule slept with the company representative, and that was the real reason she was chosen. That very night, a strange light begins glowing inside her room. Then a woman who is clearly not human appears before her. She came with an offer, and Yunhai simply didn't have the nerve to turn it down. But once she reached her target and tried to drag him into hell, she realized her body wouldn't obey. Being an executive at a top-tier company didn't automatically make him some kind-hearted saint. That harsh truth made all her hard work feel like a complete joke. He even added that mercy was only something weak people relied on. His confidence had never been blind, it was built on solid proof. As she was dragged away, she wondered if she had been the foolish one for believing she could survive after trusting a man like him. With that, the conditions were officially cleared. The gate to hell shut tight, and the target was erased from the game. The moment everything came to an end, the demoness tied to her fate started crumbling away as well. Gaaka showed up, thrilled by the win since using the demon's ability for their side had only been a risky theory. The demon was happy to be praised because his power was usually treated like a party trick for entertaining other demons. Gagako looked extremely satisfied with the outcome and was already eager to use that trick again. The masked young man put his disguise back on and prepared for the next victim. A green flash from the activated portal could be seen glowing through the window. The Watcher used that chance to grab the radio and warn everyone. That light had clearly come from one of the players' portals, which meant at least one player had already been taken down. From there, the strategist immediately started forming theories, based on what had been written in the detective's notebook. The player who opened that portal and likely won the fight would need to wait at least 1 minute before using it again. Should he take that opening and rush inside? Could he get in and out within 60 seconds without being caught? Before he could finish thinking, a hand suddenly landed on his shoulder. He flinched hard, thinking another enemy player had found him. But it was the detective, stopping him from acting recklessly because doing anything useful in 1 minute without a plan would be nearly impossible. So what was the move? The detective said it was simple. He could ask if everything was okay after hearing a scream. The Watcher tried to push back against the idea. Then it clicked. The detective planned to enter Gagaka's room under the excuse of being an officer responding to a report. Whoever had won the last battle would hesitate to send a detective straight to hell, because if that happened, more cops would likely arrive and treat him as the prime suspect. So the Watcher and his ally had one job: stop any other players from entering. Meanwhile, the detective would figure out how to handle whoever was waiting inside. With that decided, he headed straight for the building. That detective wasn't just brave. He could also read the room fast when danger hit. The whole reason they had waited so patiently was to let someone start a battle first, creating a chance to interfere. But the waiting game was making the Watcher more anxious by the second. Before he got caught and defeated, could the detective really send that guy to hell? Just as expected, the first camera had disappeared. The girl was gone, but now he understood the theme behind the enemy's personal hell. He tossed the tablet aside and spoke up. It was finally time for them to make their move as well. The elevator reached the 7th floor, right where Gagaka's apartment was located. The detective stepped out into the hallway and was instantly caught by the streamer's camera. The streamer wondered if this was an easy target, since the man didn't look like one of the residents. The detective walked to the door and pressed the bell. The young man grew excited, because the door was already unlocked, meaning the guy only had to step inside. He slipped back into the closet and made sure his demon played its role correctly. But the detective kept knocking and announced that he was responding to a report. The streamer figured it had to be because of the earlier screams and strange light. That made the situation far more dangerous than expected. And just like the detective predicted, the young man followed the exact thought process he wanted. If he sent this man to hell, he would probably end up getting arrested. But if he opened the door, it might buy enough time for other players to arrive. He needed to settle this fast. So he approached the door and asked what kind of report the detective had received. The detective said it was nothing major, just someone claiming they heard a woman scream next door, then asked if they could talk for a moment. Outside, the Watcher kept his eyes locked on the building. He wondered how he was supposed to stop other players from entering if they decided to make a move. It was way harder than it sounded, but he needed a way to stop them so the plan could keep moving. He contacted Humin Chai over the radio and asked if she had noticed any strange movement. She said not yet, then asked if things were going smoothly with the detective. Yim Seung-ji explained that the detective had gone to confront the streamer, so they had to make sure nobody else got inside. Humin Chai said she would keep watch, and he asked if she had used her ability yet today. She said she had not needed to activate it so far, since she had been with him the entire day. So he told her to use her power right then because he had a theory. What if her ability was not locked onto the closest target, but the closest person currently moving? That meant if her skill was active and another player came near, the target in her vision would probably shift. Hu Minchai had never considered using her ability like that before. Until now, every time she activated it, there had never been multiple players close enough for the target to change within 5 minutes. If his theory was right, they could separate approaching players from regular civilians near the building. The streamer's building was not just a normal residence. Someone could slip in disguised as a delivery worker or even a tenant. If the plan worked, they could spot the enemy before the enemy realized they had been exposed. That would give them the perfect opening for a surprise attack. She grabbed the walkie-talkie and prepared to move. She climbed down from the ledge and called out to Sadius, because it was finally time to act. The moment her ability activated, she saw his hand at first, but just like his theory suggested, her vision suddenly started to shift. She warned him that the two people heading toward the building right now were also players. He asked if both of them were players or only one. Since her vision kept switching back and forth, it most likely meant both of them were. Now the main character had a serious problem. If it had been one enemy, he might have found a way to deal with it. But two made everything worse, because he could not build a plan where both of them committed the sin of betrayal. Even if he managed to take down one, there was still a real chance the second one would overwhelm him. He had to stay calm. They still did not know he was a hell creator. That meant he still had the element of surprise in his hand. As soon as he showed himself, the two started questioning whether he was a player, exactly as expected. They clearly wanted to avoid dragging ordinary people in this if possible. Meanwhile, he wondered if he should keep pretending to be a resident, because even if the detective's side failed, Hu Minchai was still there. He thought back to all the major turning points in his life. Every time he ran away, it had only been a way of choosing comfort, but he was sick of always running. The young man clenched his fist while drowning in his own thoughts. He had received the key to hell so he could punish the guilty, yet here he was once again thinking about escaping. He stood frozen as the two men got closer. Then he finally made his choice. He held out his hand and told the two men they could not enter the building. Both of them stared at him in confusion. They had stopped, but now he had to figure out what to do next. His plan was to keep talking, giving the enemy no time to properly think. It felt like two masterminds in a psychological action match, each waiting for the other to slip. Yunninghan wondered if this guy was some hidden ally of Gagaka that he had missed. But he quickly decided that made no sense, since the streamer's hell was the hell of invasion, so there was no reason for him to block them here. Maybe he belonged to another enemy group instead. Still, that theory felt shaky, because if this guy was a player, his behavior did not line up. But he was not a player, then why was he trying to stop them from entering? Then the young man said they were checking the building after receiving a report about a woman screaming on the 7th floor. Yunninghan was furious, because he had not even considered the chance that a neighbor had reported it. The situation matched too well. Someone had probably called it in after hearing an unhigh scream before being dragged into hell. That meant local detectives had to secure the area. But if that explanation was true, it created two possible scenarios. Yunninghan stared at the young man with clear suspicion. After all, this guy did not look like a detective at all. He was too skinny, and the sweat running down his face made him look even more suspicious. But before doubt could turn into certainty, the young man chose to make a risky move. After all, a liar has to believe their own lie first. The businessman tried to speak with the detective's supposed assistant, but before he could continue, the young man grabbed the radio and reported the situation from downstairs. While speaking with Gaka, Park Sang-sik suddenly caught a voice crackling through the radio. The warning said two residents were trying to get inside. Since the kid contacted him first, this was probably a dangerous setup, so it was time to retreat. He answered that he was already on his way down. Apparently, the report came from someone live streaming a horror game or something similar. The two were stunned to realize the kid had actually been telling the truth. The main character proved he could think fast and play the situation like a true strategy-type webtoon lead. The checkmate was already on the board. If the enemy could not match his pace, they had no chance of keeping up. He told them the building would be cleared soon and asked them to wait just a little longer. The detective stepped out of the elevator and confirmed that nothing unusual had happened. Then he apologized for making the residents wait before entering. As he put away his police badge, he told them they were free to go in. The young man thought that even though the situation startled him, he already knew about the streamer's hell, so his plan would continue. He thanked the detective for his work and casually mentioned that the neighborhood had been pretty noisy lately. The two headed into the elevator and entered the building. The moment he stepped out, the detective wondered if those two were creators too and asked how they had figured everything out. The voice on the radio said it was thanks to a certain ability, and those two were definitely enemies. He asked about the streamer, and the older man admitted he still had not managed to send him to hell. Still, thanks to the two younger ones, they had successfully identified two more players. That brought the total to 7 known players, including the girl who had been swallowed by the YouTuber's hell. For one night of work, that was an excellent result. From this point on, the game had truly begun. For the first time, so many players had crossed paths, and their team had gathered the information they wanted. Meanwhile, a doorbell suddenly rang. It was the businessman, and he had come with an offer for the streamer. The businessman suggested that the streamer become his loyal dog. The boy immediately asked if he had lost his mind. From outside, the man said the person the streamer killed had been one of his dogs, and as long as he stayed out, the invasion hell could not activate. A confident smile spread across his face. The young man inside clearly had not expected that response. If that was true, then what could he do if the streamer simply never left his apartment? The businessman said the answer was simple. He would have someone watch the place day and night. The second the boy stepped outside, he would personally appear. And if he refused to leave at all, how long could he survive on the supplies he had? Even without ordering delivery, he might last 2 months, maybe 4 at best. That brat had basically locked himself inside his own dungeon. But instead of surrendering, the streamer fought back and chose not to leave. The lunatic trembled with excitement. Torturing him until he finally came out would be pure entertainment. After saying that, he walked away. The streamer went over his new strategy with his demon. Unlike the boy, though, the demon sounded far less optimistic. It asked whether buying time like this really mattered if they could not solve the core problem. But the boy replied that while time passed, someone else might send that man to hell first. All they needed to do was endure a little longer. But that plan did not even last a full week. Every food delivery he ordered arrived filled with garbage instead. After he reported it to the police more than 3 times, they started treating it like a prank. Not long after that, someone cut off the electricity. Then the apartment water supply became contaminated. The fear that the enemy could break in at any moment slowly turned into brutal insomnia. And when the freedom outside his apartment started feeling more tempting than ever, a business card slid under his door. It said to contact them if he had given up, and with that, the streamer finally accepted defeat. On a bright sunny day, inside the office of Q's Corporation's CEO, the businessman waited for the streamer to arrive. The boy had lasted longer than expected, but now he would become his little dog. Somewhere inside a factory in Korea, a man screamed for help while running for his life. A demon and its player were hunting him down. The player wearing a Friday the 13th Jason mask attacked, saying he had already given the man on the ground 2 choices. He could either go straight to hell or die by his hands. From his pocket, the mask guy pulled out a key. The man in white panicked, realizing that no matter what he chose, he was finished. The key starts glowing, signaling that the requirement has finally been met. Since he refused to make a choice, the Hell creator decided to choose for him. "Time for a trip to hell," he says, flashing an oddly cute wink. The portal slowly takes shape in the most disgusting way possible. Twisted flesh and viscera coil around the man. Then they swallow him whole in an instant. He sees his demon coming closer and completely loses it. It cuddles up against him, and apparently, someone here is into dark romance. The Black Knight says he respects his humans' hobbies, but if they do not start hunting the other players soon, punishment is coming. He says he gets it. He will stop hunting humans and start going after Hell creators instead. 10 days had passed since the hunt first began. 5 days had also passed since the clash with Gagaka. Yeom Sung-gi began training seriously, preparing himself for a long, brutal battle. He also started managing his meals and sleep like a proper hunter getting ready for war. He and the detective started digging into the 2 men who appeared that night. At last, they managed to uncover some solid information. One of them was Yu Nonghan, a director at QS Corporation. He was called a genius for reaching that position at only 31. As for the other man, details were scarce, but one thing was obvious. He was no ordinary player. Worse, he clearly had the mind of a strategist, making him a serious threat in this deadly game. If they or someone else failed to eliminate that player soon, he could eventually put the entire group in danger. Park Sang-sik looks at the main character and realizes the warning makes perfect sense. That man had status, money, and if his intelligence was above average too, they were in deep trouble. The other player was Jong Jong-chul, an architect with nothing especially strange in his background. He was most likely being pressured by Yu Nonghan, which may have been the man's method for building alliances. The last time the Blessing met that architect, he never spoke on his own. He only seemed willing to answer when Yu Nonghan allowed it. Still, that detail might become useful. Maybe they could use it to break the alliance between those two. He thanks the detective for the fresh intel and says as he is heading out. But Park Sang-sik could tell the young man had changed, like time had forced him to grow up. He thanked him for the kind words and said his mind was finally in a better place. At first, he had no idea how to keep living after finishing his revenge, but now that fear no longer weighed him down. Back at home, the main character admitted he felt relieved, but Baphomet questioned him, asking if he should not be focused on cutting down the number of enemies. The young man answered with an old human saying, "Victory and defeat are decided before the fight even starts." In this case, the whole battle came down to intel, how much they knew about the enemy, and how much the enemy knew about them. They could not move blindly, especially in a deadly game where the loser would suffer in hell forever, so it was smarter to prepare calmly and wait for the storm. Baphomet then asked about Hu Min-chai. He replied that she was checking for enemy players at least twice a day. Suddenly his phone began buzz. He picked up, but before he could even speak, she told him she had found another player. He asked where she had spotted him. She said it was near Myeongdong Street. She planned to contact the detective, thinking this might be their chance to hunt the player down, but he said the risk was too high, and for now they should only gather physical details. Still, this was not a residential zone. It was a busy commercial street with nowhere to hide, and she had Sadius concealed with her. Since the guy had no idea she was also a player, this was the perfect opening to catch him off guard. He had no real comeback, but the danger was still massive, especially with zero information on the other player. Before he could say anything else, she hung up. Hu Min-chai was already sick of only tracking targets and hiding in the shadows. Taking out the other players early would make this twisted system game much easier. Suddenly, her target slipped into an alley off the street. To Hu Minch, it looked like the perfect moment. He was clearly about to commit the sin of lust. Just in case, she hid the key inside her bag, but the second she turned the corner, she froze in shock. Her prey was standing completely still. When he turned around, she saw a face covered in scars. His name was Jian In Han. He had obviously known she was following him, and even after he saw her, the key of lust still did not activate. Then he charged at her like a crazed monster. Hu Minch was completely caught off guard. Later, inside an abandoned factory, Hu Minch slowly began to wake up. As she wondered where she was, a brutal headache started pounding through her skull. She remembered that scarred man ambushing her. He must have drugged her, knocked her out, and dragged her to this place. She let out a sigh. She had no one to blame but herself. He had been right, and by now, he and the detective were probably searching for her. She forced herself to calm down and think about her next move. Her key, phone, and wallet had all been taken. Even if she could not contact the other two, getting the key back would be the real problem. The place holding her had concrete walls and an iron door. Breaking out would not be easy. At least Sadius was still there to help her. She admitted they were in danger because of her, but giving up was not an option. They would find a way out. Sadius started crying, but she tried to keep the mood from collapsing. Even if she could not trust them completely, she believed the other two would find a way to rescue them. After all, they had worked together before, and her tracking ability was crucial for building their survival strategies in this deadly game. Little by little, Sadius began to believe her words, and the fear eased slightly. She picked up a chunk of concrete. Someone would come eventually. She just had to survive until then. And Park Sang-sik had been right. The moment he could no longer reach her, he called the detective. He warned him that the girl had disappeared. She might have already been dragged into another player's hell, but there was also a chance she had been kidnapped. Park Sang-sik sighed. Teenagers really were impossible to deal with, and if her disappearance exposed his identity, things could get extremely dangerous. But her ability was too valuable to lose, so the two of them prepared to start searching for her. Baphomet was fired up. At last, they were making their move. And this time, it felt like they were convinced victory was already theirs. The real question was whether Hu Min-chai could survive long enough for them to reach her. With his hands around her neck, Jo In-han mocked her, saying she had lasted pretty well for a girl. Things would have been much simpler if she had surrendered from the beginning. It looked like the drug he used barely worked on her. She called him a psycho, a maniac, and every insult she could throw at him. But to him, those words sounded like the highest praise. At the same time, Sadius and the Black Knight were locked in their own clash. But the life or death battle was supposed to be fought only by humans, and the Black Knight's player had already claimed the win. With that decided, he sent Sadius flying with a brutal blow. Under Lucifer's rules, demons could not use abilities beyond their natural gift. The girl's demon tried to stall by arguing, but it changed nothing. Jo In-han was already preparing his next move. He lifted her up and hooked her shirt in place. Then he bound her hands and feet. Even so, Hu Min-chai refused to give up. The man leaned in, trying to make out what she was whispering. She used that opening, screamed right into his ear, and bit down hard to shake him. Jo In-han recoiled from the pain, but she only clenched harder. Then something completely insane happened. He picked up a sharp tool and sliced off his own ear. If she wanted it that badly, he said she could keep it. As for her friends, he already knew they were coming because he had spotted her using a phone while tailing him. A red stream splattered down onto the floor. That was the only reason he had not killed her yet or turned her into one of his twisted dolls. To him, Hu Min-chai was nothing more and nothing less than precious bait. Those words slowly twisted the girl's hope into fear. She was terrified she might become the reason her whole team fell. He began humming, saying the setup was complete and only the main course was missing. Meanwhile, Yum Seung-ji rushed toward the location Hu Min-chai had given him earlier. He knew that with so many people around and so much time already gone, finding his partner was almost impossible, but the young man still had one hidden card. He asked Baphomet to use his power and sniff out the scent of death. The demon told him he would show him how. Then he released a wave of smoke straight toward him. Little by little, the main character's eyes adjusted to this strange new vision. The only path where his life seemed to be in danger was the one leading toward her. If his guess was right, the thicker the smoke became, the closer he was to the target. For once, he could turn that demonic power into a tracking skill. Baphomet watched him with a hint of respect. Humans always found ways to shock demons, and in only minutes, this guy had reshaped an innate ability into something like a hunter tracking tracking technique. It was impressive. The young man kept moving forward, and as the sun started to sink, he finally discovered the place where she was being held captive. The first thing he did was pull out his phone. He sent the location straight to the detective. Now he had to figure out how to get inside. Someone pushed a cart toward Hu Min Chai. She opened her eyes and saw construction tools scattered on it, including hammers and saws. If this lunatic was copying movie serial killers, then there was only one way for her to stay alive. She could not let him enjoy torturing her, so for now, she kept pretending to be unconscious. Just as she expected, he tried to wake her up, but she stayed limp. Johan clearly hated touching her unless she was awake. Still, he was growing bored because her allies were taking too long to arrive, so he decided to entertain himself while he waited. He grabbed her by the hair and, since he knew she was not really asleep, he had no plans to kill her yet, only to torment her a little. She squeezed her eyes shut, preparing for the worst, but then a sound came from outside. Sirens wailed louder as they closed in on the scene. Black Knight asked if he had left any evidence, but the human said there was nothing to stress over. He picked him for this job precisely because he handled things cleanly, so doubt was pointless. Maybe another player discovered them and reported it to the police. Or maybe one of the players was secretly a cop. Those were the only two realistic options. They had no reason to panic. All they needed was Black Knight's ability. John Inhan gave the command to activate it. The police cars sped toward the site at full throttle. Once they arrived, everyone got ready to storm the place. The tipster clearly avoided showing up out of fear for his own safety. After all, that young man was cautious and timid. Tracking the location was enough. Now the adults had to step in. It was an abandoned factory, but inside, someone had built something that looked like a haunted house. They had to sweep every inch of the area. According to the report, a woman had been dragged inside, and the priority was finding her before things got worse. Everything seemed under control, so why was Baphomet's power getting stronger? One officer moved deeper into the building. Walking through those windowless walls felt like stepping into a horror dungeon. He spotted a shadowy figure, but it vanished almost instantly. Claws suddenly reached out from behind him. A moment later, his life was over. It played out exactly like a horror movie. Black Knight had made his opening move, and inside that armor now was the young man, completely thrilled that he had pulled it off with his own hands. The demon told him to stay focused because the ability burned away his lifespan. If he remained in the armor too long, their game would end early. The human only grew more excited. He wanted to hunt down the rest immediately. The detective was also moving through the area. Something about that maze-like structure felt seriously wrong. No matter how desperate he was to save the girl, this was obviously a trap. He warned the others over the radio and ordered them to retreat. The structure was far more complicated than expected, so they needed backup. But no one answered his call. Park Sang-sik started panicking when the radio stayed silent. Something was moving straight toward him. He could feel the aura of death creeping closer and closer. As a proper officer, he braced himself for the attack. The armor suddenly appeared from his side. He noticed in time and barely dodged the strike. That only made his opponent more excited. He fired his gun, but the armor did not even take a scratch. What the hell was this thing? A human? A demon? He could not make sense of it. The armor lunged again, and he dodged once more. With no better option, he asked his demon what that thing actually was. The demon answered that it was Black Knight. The detective questioned him while still trying to fight back. As far as he knew, participating demons were forbidden from attacking humans. But Gargamon explained that this was the demon's ability. Then he told him to look more carefully. Inside the demon's helmet, a human face could clearly be seen. Damn it, those two were exploiting a loophole in the rules to launch their attacks. He let his weapon fall to the floor. Human or not, if he wanted to survive, he had to fight. Meanwhile, his enemy was enjoying the battle more with every second. Yeom Sung-gi grew uneasy as the delay dragged on and strains echoed from inside. Suddenly, the detective was blasted out through the factory side door. The combined force of the human and the demon armor was far beyond what he could handle. The young man froze in shock at the sight. The human and his armored demon form closed in on the detective. His instincts kicked in, and he asked if someone else was hiding nearby. If they did not reveal themselves soon, he would open the portals and devour the detective. Hearing that, Yeom Sung-ji realized there might still be a chance. Park Sung-sik gave a faint smile. He remembered his father wearing the Korean police uniform. His family once lived together in a modest but carefully kept home. A TV news report about a criminal's arrest was playing in the room. Park Sang-sik stared at it like he had been put under a spell. Then, out of nowhere, his mother smacked him on the head with a spoon. He asked if the boy never got tired of watching that stuff. But the boy said those news reports fired him up. His father usually came home in the late afternoon. He always brought snacks for him and his younger brother. He also made sure to share the most exciting stories from his day at work. But one day, his father never walked through that door. Instead, his coworkers arrived with the news. Apparently, while investigating a criminal organization, he had been captured. The man who once felt untouchable, even after surviving a stabbing, died from the injuries caused by countless kicks. and because there were too many attackers, they could not pin down the main culprit. On TV, the report about the fallen officer was buried, so the public would not lose trust in the police. He stared at the screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. That was when he understood just how rotten and unfair society could be. Furious, he slammed the remote onto the floor and finally snapped. From that moment on, he swore to become a detective and bring his father the justice he was denied. But sometimes evil still wins, all thanks to legal loophole and shady backroom deals fueled by selfish ambition. At times, the people meant to uphold justice smelled even worse than the criminals. The detective had not chosen that path only for revenge, but to inherit his father's will and fight those injustices head-on. Someone had to clean up that corrupted mess. He wanted to give the powerless the justice they could never reach alone. So he poured every ounce of himself into the job. Then one day, something abnormal appeared right in front of him. It was the chance he needed to deliver justice with his own hands. Back in the present, the detective had taken a brutal hit. He was sent flying, while John Inhan kept getting more addicted to that savage power. The detective could barely stay on his feet, but he still refused to back down. He could not let himself lose like this. There were still too many injustices waiting for his judgment. He pulled the key from his pocket and tried to open his hell, but his enemy seized his hand and said that if he could not turn the key, he could not open anything. Even then, the detective kept forcing him to try, but seconds later, he was knocked down again. The moment his key dropped to the ground, John Inhan kicked it far out of reach. Gargamon said he was not allowed to interfere, but even he admitted the fight was ridiculously unfair. The enemy asked what kind of fight they expected this to be. From his point of view, no matter how many strategies the detective made, society itself had not evolved enough. Nothing felt better than living as a predator, a beast that could dominate its prey and devour it without hesitation. In simple terms, no matter how clever a rabbit gets, it still cannot stop a leopard. He raised his fist ready to end it. Then someone else suddenly pulled his attention away. John Inhan looked at Yeom Seung-ji, wondering why another little rabbit had wandered into the battlefield. The detective looked at him too, secretly grateful that his ally had arrived. The psychopath questioned why so many creators were showing up all at once. Meanwhile, the young man tried to keep his cool even though his legs were shaking like leaves in a storm. The detective prayed his ally had a plan, because without one, they were completely finished. The brute released his previous prey and turned all his focus toward the newcomer. The young man braced himself. His enemy was pure muscle, so the only way in was through his pride. And just like expected, John Inhan walked straight into the bait. Yeom Seung-gi held his tough guy pose and challenged him head-on. The enemy marched toward him, closing the distance step by step. When he was almost within striking range, the protagonist asked Baphomet to reveal the scent of death at the lowest possible level. In that instant, he knew this fight was already his. He waited until the final moment, right as the enemy launched his punch. He dodged, and John Inhan realized this guy had avoided a blow even the detective could not escape. The young man smiled, convinced victory was within reach. After learning about Baphomet's power, he realized that with the right logic, it could become an absurdly strong ability. One way to use it was predicting an opponent's move and finding the exact route away from death. And since this attack was purely physical, dodging it became much easier. Basically, by knowing the precise moment he had a 100% chance of dying, he could evade attacks with deadly accuracy. Step by step, John Inhan starts getting frustrated, unable to understand why he still can't catch his target. Inside his head, Black Knight warns that every move drains more of his life, so he has to finish this fight fast. Meanwhile, Yeom Seung-gi quietly thanks himself for sticking to his morning training. His stamina is solid, so he can keep that pace a little longer while dodging and forcing the enemy to burn even more energy. Certain he has the upper hand, the main character keeps messing with his opponent's head. His reflexes and overall body condition have clearly leveled up. He jumps back several times to keep the distance, but Baphomet warns that time is running out, and they need a way to make the brute betray the rules. Yeom Seung-ji refuses that idea because he has teammates, and while he keeps the enemy busy, Park Sang-sik-ho is slowly creeping toward the key. If he reaches it in time, their team can lock in the win. It is a brilliant plan, but Baphomet worries about what happens if the main character notices the detective again. As if catching that thought, he starts questioning why that little rabbit keeps provoking him and running in circles. Then the realization hits, and when he turns around, Park Sang-sik-ho's hand is almost on the key, but he is still just a little too far to grab it. Rage takes over as he realizes those two have been playing him the whole time. Without hesitating, he charges straight at the detective. The detective uses the last of his strength to lunge for the key. Park Sang-sik-ho finally snatches it and points it at his target. Now it is time to send someone straight to hell. He turns the key, the door opens, and chains slowly coil around the main character. They begin dragging him inside, but before he can fall into the hell of injustice, he digs his fingers into the ground, leaving everyone stunned. He knows he deserves hell after everything he has done. Even so, there are still too many things in that world he wants to see. In the red light district, several people move through the streets. A boy was born and raised in that harsh place. Life there was never easy, especially for a child. He notices a beautiful woman standing there with a cigarette. A man appears to be walking toward her. His name is Inguk, and without warning, he slaps the woman. He tells her not to say his name so casually. Twisted by a violent childhood, he finds pleasure in repeating the pain once forced on him. It begins with stray animals and slowly escalates to human victims. Suddenly, Yeom Seung-gi comes flying in from behind with a brutal kick. He says he does not care about the guy's past as a serial killer. The moment the kick lands, the villain loses his grip on the ground and is finally swallowed whole by the hell of injustice. Somehow the battle ends with their side taking the victory. As the adrenaline fades, the detective starts feeling the pain hit him all at once. Yeom Seung-gi walks over, offers him a hand, and says they still need to rescue Hoo Min-chae. The detective jokes with him, saying it feels weird to see him acting this friendly. The old man is exhausted and jokes that his nephew should carry him from here. The winners of this round are Yeom Seung-gi and Park Sang-sik Ho, making their alliance even stronger. Hoo Min-chae is still tied up inside the factory. At last, the doors swing open. Bright light floods into the room. They really came back for her. They took a serious beating, but they still completed the mission. Yeom Seung-gi picks up a shard of glass and starts cutting her restraints. The moment she is freed, her legs give out and she collapses into his lap. She always acts tough, but now she breaks down crying like a child. Feeling death so close had completely terrified her. He gives Hoo Min-chae the time she needs to let everything out. Park Sang-sik Ho and the young man had sent that monster to hell, so there is nothing left to fear. Soon the medical team arrives, and they arrange the scene so it looks like the detective rescued the kidnapped girl. Meanwhile, the protagonist stays hidden in the shadows and disappears without a trace. The killer is gone and now being hunted, so the case appears to be wrapped up. But a TV news report about the incident catches the eye of a certain businessman. Bit by bit, he began piecing the whole mystery together. The same guy had shown up during Gagaka's fight, and now he was tied to this case too. That raised a nasty possibility. The detective might also be one of the Hell creators. Everyone believed the culprit had escaped and gone into hiding, but what if he was actually trapped inside the detective's hell? Yeonung has to call the CEO. He asked his boss to start looking into Park Sang-sik. He used the excuse that he wanted to show respect and gratitude for being rescued. Soon enough, he would know whether his doubts about that officer were justified. The next morning at the hospital, Yeom Seung-gi was going through paperwork while Hoo Min-chae slept nearby. Slowly, she began to regain consciousness. When her eyes opened, she saw a young man standing in front of her. He joked that the little brat had finally decided to wake up. Without a second thought, she threw herself into his arms and sent him stumbling. Everything crashed straight onto the floor. The sudden hug left him completely flustered, but the moment he noticed her tears, his face softened. For a guy like him, he was handling it surprisingly well. Embarrassed, he got back on his feet and gently placed Hoo Min-chae back on the bed. For now, she needed to calm down and recover. Meanwhile, he would tell the detective she was awake, but before he left, there were some documents he needed to give her. They contained research on their two remaining opponents. He had meant to hand them over earlier, but after the incident, this was his first real chance. Before leaving, he told Hoo Min-chae to read every page carefully. He also reminded her to take care of herself. When he reached the detective's room, he jokingly complained that he was hurt the detective had visited Hoo Min-chae first. A grown man getting jealous was honestly something else, but their conversation kept moving. Then the detective slipped a hand into his pocket and handed a key over to the young man. After everything that happened, it was obvious that hunting down other Hell creators would not be simple. Monsters like that serial killer would never stop, and as this deadly game continued, the danger would only keep leveling up. It was a spare key to Park Sang-sik's house. Even if their enemies were insane, they probably would not risk attacking a detective's home, making it the safer option. The young man accepted the logic. In the end, having an adult to depend on was not such a bad thing. He said he would move in once he finished taking care of a few things at home, but Park Sang-sik still had one more thing for him. He picked up a notebook and passed it to the young man. Inside that notebook were the accurate details and numbers. It was different from the version he had given him when they first formed their alliance. For a brief second, the young man's entire world seemed to crack, because what the detective had done could easily count as betrayal. If that activated his key, it would be the perfect opening to erase him. After all, by the end of this deadly system-like game, that detective would definitely become a terrifying enemy. His abilities were all top tier, and judging from their past battles, he was almost guaranteed to be the final opponent. The young man wondered what he should do now that the crime had been confirmed. Should he save this chance for later, or take him out right now? Noticing that the boy seemed strange, the detective asked if he was feeling sick. He avoided answering and said he just needed to use the restroom. Just as expected, his keys were glowing. Baphomet appeared and pointed out how the changed notebook information could have put them in serious danger. That meant the sin of betrayal had been committed. So this was the ideal moment to end the detective for good, since he had a powerful ability and knew far too much about them. If he betrayed them again, it would probably happen when the young man was forced straight into his hell. The young man clenched his key with all his strength. When the demon first gave him the chance to create his own hell, he had chosen betrayal, because out of every sin that was the one he despised most. But if he betrayed Park Sang-sik now, he would never forgive himself, because he would be no different from the people he had judged and punished. Thinking even further, what if he grew old, died, and this betrayal became his karma, dragging him into his own hell? Then he would have to face everyone he hated all over again, and that was the one fate he could not accept. Baphomet listened and said that when he first met him, he wanted to twist that inferiority complex, those dark thoughts, and all that rage into the perfect personal hell. But the closer he got to those two humans, the more Yeom Seung-gi seemed to change into someone else entirely. Human bonds and attachments meant absolutely nothing to him, but if the main character ever made a choice that put both their lives in danger, Baphomet would make sure he paid for that mistake. The young man accepted the terms, but he was confident he would never give the demon a reason to regret it. Back in the detective's hospital room, the three of them gathered and kept talking for a little longer. Then a man suddenly walked up, and it was none other than Yoon Nung-han. He had already gathered the intel he needed, so now he chose to make his official entrance. After a long conversation, Hu-minch decided to head back to her room and rest a little more. Out in the hallway, the two hell creators passed each other without realizing who the other truly was. Yoon Nung-han stepped into the room with a friendly act, saying he was glad to see them again. But that instantly both the young man and Park Sang-sik raised their guard. Dropping the fake smile, he asked if they were teaming up or planning to throw him into hell. The young man grew slightly cautious, but the older man moved in front. Pretending not to understand, Park Sang-sik said he had no clue what he meant, and asked how he even entered such a private room. The businessman replied that the detective's acting was good enough to win a Nobel Prize. At that moment, they realized there was no easy way out. Yoon Nung-han continued, saying that officially he had only come to congratulate a police officer who heroically saved a girl from a serial killer. But the real reason was that he wanted to offer both of them an alliance. The young man was completely caught off guard by the proposal. But the bigger question was how this guy had managed to find them. Had he slipped up that night? Or had he left behind a clue when they saved Hu-minche? The businessman noticed the boy wondering how he had pieced everything together. He said it was not that difficult. After all, a famous detective and a kid who looked far too young to be his partner were obviously going to stand out. On top of that, Yoon Nung-han had his secretary investigate their backgrounds, and that was when he learned the young man was only a student. He placed the fruit basket on the table. Then he said it made him wonder why a respected detective was involving himself in cases outside his authority, especially while dragging an ordinary student into it. That was how he figured they were probably hell creators who had formed a temporary alliance. During the Gaka battle and the serial killer case, they fought side by side, because their enemies were players too. With all that laid out, he did not need to explain any further. So what now? Should they admit it? Or did the detective have another trick to escape this trap? Park Sang-sik smirked and mocked him, asking what he actually expected them to say after all that. That reaction left the other too stunned. But before anyone could respond, he asked what Yoon Nung-han truly wanted. Were they supposed to kneel and beg to become his servants like Zhang Chao? Or was that not needed? It seemed the businessman had finally met a player on his level, someone who also knew his background and movements. Yoon Nung-han said there was no need for that. If that were his goal, he would not have wasted his time and would have sent a lackey instead. Like he had already said, what he wanted was a powerful alliance with the two of them. But Park Sang-sik rejected him without hesitation. He already had a strong alliance with the architect and had probably recruited the streamer as well, so it was time to expose what that spoiled brat was really after. He gave a crooked smile, then revealed something neither of them saw coming. Apparently, Yang Cheol had vanished, and the businessman had no idea if he died in hell or was being held somewhere. So he wanted to catch the culprit. He needed to find whoever had moved around him without being detected, because anyone capable of that had to be one of the most dangerous players in this deadly system game. He said this while holding out his hand. Yoon Nung-han was not interested in empty promises or useless deals. He only wanted them to cooperate until they found the person behind the architect's disappearance. And right then the young man made his choice. This businessman was a dangerous player, so sending him into the hell of betrayal would not be simple. His hell had limits, but there was still a way to deal with it. He reached out his hand, and the two shook on it. The young man would accept the alliance for now, then eventually make that man betray him. Inside an abandoned building, the architect was tied to a chair. Someone stepped toward him, and it was a girl who had looked completely harmless until now. Her name was Chae-mu-jin. The moment she appeared, the two thugs beside him lowered their heads with respect. She told them to rip the tape off the man's mouth and make him speak. The main character immediately started swearing, demanding to know who they were and why they were doing this. Ignoring his outburst, the girl asked what crime he had committed and began counting down. When he stayed silent until the count ended, she ordered her demon to handle him. The architect asked if they could simply talk it out, but this situation was already beyond normal negotiation. One of his fingers was forced backward, and the man let a scream of pure pain. At the same time, she asked him again what his crime was. Panicking, the young man said he would tell her anything she wanted to know, but she simply ordered them to break another finger. The architect twisted on the floor in agony. She calmly told him she wanted a short, clear answer, then repeated the question about his crime. The man finally answered that his crime was negligence. She then asked if he knew the hell of any other player. Fighting through the pain, he answered with the word capable. But since that response was too vague, she ordered them to snap another one. To stop them, he yelled that it was the name of one of the players. Even then, the punishment still came. In the heavy silence of the room, the sound of a printer started running. If he meant a person, he should have clearly given the name from the beginning. The man kept protesting, saying he had already agreed to cooperate, and that this was unnecessary. She reviewed the information she had collected on Yu Nung Han, the player known as Capable. He looked smart and well-connected, but none of that mattered because she would find a way to drag him into hell. After that, she called 2 of her partners over. Then she told them it was time to prepare. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Yu Nung Han said he had no real details about the person who kidnapped the architect, which made the investigation much harder. Still, there was one thing he knew for sure. If that guy had leaked any information about him to the enemy, they would definitely gather and try to ambush him. She asked whether his men were ready. Everyone answered that they were. During that ambush, the businessmen planned to capture the other player, which was the whole purpose of their alliance. 12 years earlier, inside a parking garage, people were being executed under a boss's orders. One man still tried to cling to his gang's pride. He said those rats could not just walk in like that and leave without paying the price. But before he could continue, they shut him up with a direct hit. The beating continued until he finally went silent. They knew the danger of coming there, but they had shown up specifically to settle the score. The rival gang leader, Kim Jung-soo, said that if they had stayed quiet and not resisted, they might have escaped with only a few slaps. Suddenly, 3 foreign luxury cars rolled into the parking garage. Armed men climbed out from each vehicle. Chae Moon-jong, the leader of the Chae-seobang gang, had arrived. Kim Young-soo greeted him like this was just another casual meeting. One of the subordinates bristled at the man's shameless attitude, but the boss remained composed and asked what he wanted. He smiled, saying there was no point pretending he did not know why they had come since their business was far from over. A wheelchair was pushed forward. In it sat Cho Seung-rak, a young man of vegetative state who had once been one of the Jongno gang's heads. Just look at him now, beaten so badly that no one even knew if he would ever walk again. Kim Jong-soo then asked how the leader of Chae-seobang planned to compensate them for this. Another man snapped that it was Cho Seung-rak's own fault for stepping into their territory, but before he could say anything else, his own boss silenced him with a slap. More than anyone else, he understood the situation, so there was no need for his men to run their mouths. If Chae Moon-jong understood what was happening, that meant the old man was ready to pay for the damage. 2 suitcases were tossed at his feet. The bold one said all he had to do was fill both cases with dollars and split the profits from his territory with them. That way, the Chae-seobang gang's resources would become theirs, letting them expand much faster. It was pathetic that their boss's son ended up ruined like that, so what was the old man even waiting for? It was time to load the bags, or they might as well start a full-blown gang right there. Chae Moon-jong orders his subordinate to bring out his daughter. The subordinate obeys and pulls the little girl out of the car. At that time, she was only 7 years old. Kim Jung-soo snaps, asking what kind of crazy plan this was, using pity against gangsters. The man gently strokes his daughter's head. Then he says the man standing before him still has a debt to pay, and if he cannot pay it himself, then she will have to pay it for him. The old man reaches into his coat and pulls out something sharp. His enemy said his boss's son would never walk again, so if he did the same to this man's daughter, the score would be even. Before anyone can react, he cuts both of the girl's Achilles tendons. Everyone freezes, completely shaken by what they just witnessed. Nobody saw a brutal twist like that coming. Even gangsters with over 20 years in the underworld had never seen a father destroy his own child's future like that. That moment crossed every line imaginable. As the little girl trembles in unbearable pain, her father strokes her again and says he now owes her an enormous debt, and one day he promises he will repay it. Something drops onto the floor. A man bends down and picks it up. Around him, several gangsters are already lying beaten and broken. Even stranger, black smoke is leaking from their mouths, noses, and ears like something out of a dark fantasy manhwa. In the middle of the chaos, Chae Moo-jin sits calmly in her chair. The demon asks if he should finish things for her, but the young woman refuses. She wants to collect the debt with her own hands, so all he has to do is push her chair. In the main hall, her father starts trembling. The moment the door opens, he understands that judgment has arrived. His daughter has finally gained enough power to come for the debt he owes. Desperate, he begs her not to come any closer, but nothing can save him now. Chae Moo-jin turns the key. A gate to hell opens, dragging away her father's body and soul. That is how she leaves the scene after finally getting her payment. If the businessman controlled the world in the light, Chae Moo-jin ruled everything hidden in the shadows. Unlike Yu Nong-han and his men who used corporate power to commit crimes without getting caught, the gang serving under her commits crimes in her name. because it keeps them from being dragged to hell. One of her subordinates hands over a copy of the businessman's schedule. She praises the subordinate for a job well done. Then the question becomes what to do with the architect. He begs for mercy, saying he gave them everything they wanted and was also being used by Yoon Han. She moves closer, looks straight into his eyes, and says she will let him live. But from this point on, he owes her, because she spared him when she could have ended him on the spot. Zhang Zhangchul accepts the deal because a debt is still better than death. So the gangster tells them to release him, since the guy still has some use. She looks over the businessman's schedule one more time. Then she notices the charity party is in 2 days, making it the perfect chance for an ambush. Che Mu-jin orders her men to gather as many people as they can. The day arrives, and everyone is already assembled. She asks if her men are prepared. They all answer yes, because the mission is finally about to begin. Everyone heads toward their assigned cars. Far away at a mansion, the party is already underway. Yoon Han is busy chatting with several powerful guests. Then he suddenly notices the guests he has been waiting for most. Yeom Sung-ji and Park Sang-sik were invited to the party as his personal bodyguards. But that was not really their plan. The detective says he only came for the food. The boy was the one who agreed to the alliance, not him. Yeom Sung-ji tells him to stop being so dramatic. Then he asks the businessman if he is certain the target will appear tonight. The businessman says he is sure, because unlike corporate buildings, this place is easier to enter and has weaker security. That made it much easier for someone to disappear into the crowd of guests. So there was no doubt they would walk right into his trap. Another Hellmaker was closing in on the party. The game was about to restart. At the mansion rented by the businessman, the party was already in full swing. From far away, Che Mu-jin watched the police movements through binoculars. For such a high-profile event, the security looked surprisingly weak. Even the rookies under her could have handled it better. The young man beside her asked what they should do next. Their target was the businessman, and wasting this opening would be foolish. As for everyone else, they would simply remove anyone who got in the way. Handling it like that would not be difficult. A man got out of the car. Then he headed straight for the main gate. As expected, a guard stopped him and said only guests with invitations could enter. The man slipped a hand into his coat like he was searching for an envelope. The guard kept his eyes on him, already suspicious. But instead of an invitation, he pulled out something else. Before the guard could even react, the young man struck him down. That was one obstacle out of the way, because the attack was so sudden and fast. The second guard had no time to respond or warn the others. Just like that, the entrance was wide open. Over the radio, the woman ordered Team 1 and Team 2 to enter the party. Both teams hit the gas and rushed in. Since subtlety was not part of the plan, everyone noticed them almost immediately. A squad of armed men stormed into the party. After hijacking the sound system through the radio, the gangster warned everyone not connected to the businessman to stay calm and move toward the walls. Their only target was the QS businessman. Anyone who failed to move to the walls immediately would be treated as an enemy. The businessman watched the chaos unfold, realizing they really had come. That meant he only needed to slip away quietly before the crowd fully panicked. Then a scream rang out. A man was now lying on the floor in front of the gang. Sadly, that poor guest had been turned into an example so everyone would understand the danger instantly. That was enough to send the guests running in terror. Meanwhile, the businessman stayed exactly where he was. The gangster who had taken down the guest finally spotted him. Yeom Seung-gi was clearly interested in seeing how this would play out, but the detective refused to let him risk his life. Being the businessman's allies did not mean they had to fight for him. There were far too many enemies. At least 24 were present. There was no way to drag all of them to hell at once. And if the businessman got captured, that was not necessarily a bad outcome. After all, he was still a dangerous opponent. From the detective's perspective, that decision made sense. There was not much they could do in that situation. The businessman tried to face the situation as calmly as possible. He acted like everything was still under control. One subordinate radioed the boss and reported that they had found the target, then asked where to take him. She answered that there was no need to take him anywhere. Her order was simple: kill him. Her demon asked if she was not planning to throw him into her hell, but she replied that the rules were clear. Lucifer had called it a death game, and sending people to hell was not the only way to win. If she appeared in person to drag him to hell, she would be taking a huge risk. Besides, that pig of an architect had said the businessman hired someone called Gagaka too. The memory of the architect screaming that information flashed through her mind. The second she entered that mansion, she would become an easy target. She was simply being careful, even though he understood her logic. Her demon still did not like the plan. After all, what he wanted was to watch humans get dragged into hell. She burst into loud laughter and told Cherubim not to worry. Once this game ended, she would send every gang member who had been there when she got injured straight to hell. It looked like the businessman still had the whole situation under control. Yu Nonghan snapped his fingers and announced that the real game was about to begin. One gangster asked if this guy had completely lost his mind, but one by one armed men started slipping out from the crowd. Then they closed in on the gangsters. The clash erupted and the main character's side quickly started gaining the upper hand. They may have tracked his entire schedule, but there was no way they verified every guest at the event. Before the party even began, the businessman had already hired guards to disguise themselves among the guests. He ordered them to play their roles naturally, avoid drawing attention, and watch every movement around them. Che Mu-jin was not the only one who could command dangerous fighters. He respected her nerve for trying to strike first, but now the real question was what she could do next. Hidden in the darkness, the gangster smirked. Through the radio, her men reported that guards had appeared, and they could not even approach the businessmen. So she ordered groups 3 and 4 to force their way in. Once again, more cars rolled forward and entered the mansion grounds. The young man watched the chaos unfold, completely unfazed by the enemy reinforcements. Then he slowly started walking toward his mansion. It was finally her turn to act, so she told her demon to hunt that man down and bring him back as a prize. She was certain she would make him the next commander of all hell. Cherubim stepped out of the car and advanced toward his target. The battle kept raging across the mansion garden, and once Cherubim arrived, his overwhelming power instantly changed the flow of the fight. That demon had no true body, but he could possess humans like a twisted fantasy curse. But during one of his punches, he shattered the hand of the human body he was using. One guy seized the opening and landed a clean strike from behind. At that moment, Cherubim used the destruction of his old vessel to his advantage. Then he took over the body of the man who had hit him. Once the new possession was complete, he smiled, feeling stronger than ever. This body was far better than the last one, but because of his nature, he did not care who was friend or foe, and the battlefield quickly collapsed into pure chaos. He shouted for the other gangsters to use the opening he created and rushed the mansion. Fueled by that push, the men started moving again. Meanwhile, the tactical duel between the two commanders kept going, and one piece after another was taken off the board. This was not about waiting for the perfect timing. It was about winning at any cost. The pounding at the mansion's front door grew louder by the second. The gangsters kept ramming into it, desperate to break through. Then another gangster arrived and kicked the door wide open, letting their men pour inside. He ordered his subordinates to split into teams of 2 or 3 and begin the hunt. They were not leaving until they had the main character's head. With that, everyone scattered through the mansion in search of their prey. In one room, 2 subordinates complained about how rich people loved showing off while preparing to search the place. One of them noticed a closet, assumed nobody would be hiding there, and opened it. But inside that closet was Gagaka. He was holding his key in his hand. Then, one after another, he started swallowing the gangsters, dragging them straight into his invasion hell. The boys' hell came with a condition. In theory, it should not have worked inside that mansion. But as a true strategist, before even building an attack plan, the businessman had already invested in defense by altering the property documents for his estates. He added Gaka's name to all of them so the boy could activate his power across any private property he owned. Thanks to that, the boy used the chance to turn the mansion into his own territory. He built secret passages and hidden traps throughout the entire place. Because of that, he could move freely and reach any part of the house faster than anyone else. That made his ability even more deadly. Meanwhile, the young man observed everything from the VIP section. More enemies than expected were being pulled into Gaka's hell, but they still had not captured the real target. So where was the boss hiding? At last, the entire battle reached a deadlock. Chaemajin noticed the members who went into the mansion were vanishing one after another. All she heard were their screams before they got swallowed up. That terrifying power might belong to the businessman, or maybe his other accomplice. The problem was she had already sent every one of her men inside. She ordered the remaining members in the mansion to pull back to the garden. Since it looked like his key did not work there, the garden was basically a safe zone. One by one, they started making it out. Turns out they were not completely stupid after all, and they finally chose to retreat. Just when the situation was getting entertaining and the boy was having fun, they decided to run. With no tricks left, he stayed inside the mansion and told Gagaka to hold position 2. Calling the police now would be pointless. The only move that could flip the board was his alliance with Seung-ji. Outside, the two of them stayed in place, just like the rest of the guests. Seung-ji slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out an earpiece. Looks like another player had entered this deadly game. It was someone even Young-han had no clue about. Hu Min-chai was their hidden trump card. He contacted her through the radio. She answered right away, saying she could hear him perfectly. Seung-ji asked if she had found the player attacking the mansion. To use her ability properly, she began circling the mansion at full speed. With her power, she was able to sense Seung-ji. She also detected Park Sang-sik, Yoon Young-han, Gagaka, and one more person. That person was near the mansion entrance. But since it was a woman, she could not drag her into the hell of lust. He said they could not move right now, and asked if the girl was willing to follow his commands. Since she had already nearly died once, she at least believed he would not betray her, so she simply said she was ready for anything. The first step was to approach that woman and figure out why she was still hiding. Most likely her hell lacked flexibility, so there probably was not much she could do with it. Besides, her demon was out in the garden, which meant they still had time. She slowly moved toward the car. Meanwhile, the woman in the car kept thinking about what her next move should be. If the police arrived, she would have no choice but to escape. Then, out of nowhere, a girl opened her car door and scared her. Acting like they already knew each other, the girl asked to get in because it was cold outside. The gangster demanded to know who she was. Hu Minch said showing her would be easier than explaining, then pulled her key from her pocket. How did this girl know she was there? More importantly, How did she know she was also a hell creator? Was that her ability? The girl told her to calm down because she had not come to fight. As proof, she pointed out that her ki was not reacting. Someone wanted to have a quick conversation with her. Then she took out the earpiece and placed it in the woman's ear. Once the call connected, she asked what he wanted. If he was in the garden, that meant he was hiding among the businessman's guests. And yes, he was hiding, but he had a purpose. To pull it off, he needed her help. His objective was to capture Yu Nunghan together. Right now, she could not do anything from outside, and that was obvious from the way her partners were frozen in the garden. If she agreed to follow his plan, he could catch the businessman off guard. She hesitated because she did not know his real intentions, but like she said, she was powerless outside. Everything was unfolding exactly the way Yeom Seung-gi wanted. In the end, she accepted the temporary alliance. Bit by bit, she relayed new orders to her subordinates. They faced the guests and threatened them to obey whatever the man said. Everyone had to line up. They were about to enter the house of the person who had invited them. Slowly, the whole group started moving back into the mansion. Everything was going according to plan. Once every hostage was inside, the next order was simple: one gangster for each guest. So every gangster picked a guest. Then they paired off together. It honestly looked like a twisted three-legged race was about to start inside the mansion. The one who came up with that strategy was Yeom Seung-gi. It was the most effective way to counter Gagaka's hell. He contacted Yu Nung-han and asked what he should do next. Unfortunately, every single one of those people was a valuable client. The venue was packed with influential public figures. And beyond the guests, how would the hell creators judge him after this? More importantly, how could he possibly explain everything to the authorities later? Simply put, he had no room to move. To protect his reputation and his business, he could not reveal his power. So he gave a strict order that Gagaka must not use his ability under any circumstances. That allowed the gang members to keep searching without creating even bigger problems. From the moment Yeom Seung-gi agreed to that alliance, he stopped caring about the player who was hunting the main character, because the real threat in this deadly game was the businessman himself, and taking him down mattered most. The businessman began spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. The thugs who had relied only on raw violence until then suddenly started making sharp, tactical decisions. In other words, it looked like someone else had taken command of the battlefield. But who was the new mastermind pulling the strings? He had 3 partners backing him up, so could his enemy also have hidden allies? No, that should have been impossible. The most likely answer was that someone inside had started giving the orders. That would explain how they built a countermeasure against Gagaka's power. He hated the idea of depending on his demon's ability, but the situation had finally forced his hand. He summoned Ram and the demon appeared beside him. Then the businessman demanded to use the demon's future vision. Since it was the first time a human had ever asked for it, the demon gladly agreed. The demon slammed his staff against the floor. The Eye of Horus began to shine. A magic formation spread across the ground. Of course, the businessman had avoided using that ability until now. Even though it was overpowered, it only had 3 uses, and he was not dumb enough to waste it on anything less urgent than this crisis. The entire room started glowing. Then the businessman saw flashes of the next few hours unfolding before him. They were going to discover his hideout, and just as expected, the young strategist was the one behind it. The moment he tried to use his ki, he would be stopped and then attacked by the boy, and in that instant he would die on the spot. Rage overtook him when he realized the young strategist had orchestrated everything. If Baphomet's power could sense the essence of death, then Ram's power could reveal the near future and change its outcome. So through the radio, he ordered Gagaka to hunt down the young strategist. But there was one major issue. That target was a guest, not an intruder. Once again, the businessman had no idea what move to make. How long had that brat been setting up this trap? Desperate, he stared at the security cameras without blinking, tracking every single step the boys made. In reality, the young strategist had not planned that far ahead. He lacked the information needed for such a perfect scheme. But he had allies and he trusted the detective to cover him. He also had Hu Minchai working from the outside. Without those allies, he never could have won this information war. Unfortunately for the businessman, this was supposed to be one of his lucky days, but it had become a nightmare. Ram was shocked to see a human trembling that badly. He had misread the situation from the start. He believed the detective and the architect's kidnapper were the biggest threats, but the student had been the real Trojan horse. At that exact moment, he could not rely on Gaka's ability and had only himself left. He could not believe a worthless nobody like that had dared to betray him. He would make that foolish kid pay for his incompetence. So he finally ordered Gaka to move. It no longer mattered what the guests thought, since they would not be pulled in the fight anyway. Gagaka was delighted by the command. If he had fewer restrictions, he would gladly cut loose. His demon was practically buzzing with excitement. Then he transformed into the businessman. At that point, the whole chase would turn into tag with a fake decoy leading them around. And just like expected, his enemies were biting the streamer's bait like clueless ducks in a trap. In the first wave alone, they had already taken out 4 opponents. He turned the key, and the gates opened. Someone reported that the businessman had been spotted near the lobby. It was time to stop worrying about the guests and make a move. The main character could not fix figure out why the gangster beside him had suddenly run off, especially without a comms device. Then the guy claimed he had found the target in another area of the mansion. But that explanation felt off. Even staying hidden and alive in this place would be hard enough. What was that crazy bastard even trying to pull? The real Yoon Young-han stepped out and moved straight toward the young man. Meanwhile, the disguised ally kept the others busy with his fake identity. Ram asked what he was thinking and whether he actually had a plan. After all, revealing himself like that was far from a smart move. But his objective was simple: find that little nerd and end this. Then his demon asked how he intended to make that happen. That was when the businessman held out his key. He possessed the power to see the future, a cheat-like ability his enemy did not have. So compared to someone with that kind of system-level advantage, a guy like the young man looked completely useless. In the end, businessman told Ram never to doubt him again. He despised even the idea of someone standing above him. After all, he had started with nothing. An elderly woman walked through a dark hallway and opened a door. Behind that door was a 7-year-old boy. She greeted him with pure warmth and asked if he was hungry. She had brought roasted sweet potatoes for them to share. The child said he was studying hard so he could grow up to become a successful boss and make a ton of money. His dream of becoming rich was painfully innocent. He only wanted a better life. He also wanted to pay off his father's debt so he and his grandmother would not have to keep running. She gently patted his head and told him that money and fame might look dazzling, but some things mattered far more. The child looked confused for a moment, so his grandmother explained that the time they spent together was something money could never buy, because in the end, not everyone and everything can be bought. Some things were beyond even the richest person's reach. In other words, she did not want him to become like his father, blinded by money until he lost everything. Years later, they found themselves inside a law office. The bills had finally caught up with them. There was no way they could ever pay that amount. Because of the stress, his elderly grandmother's health collapsed. That was how the young man was left completely alone in the world while still grieving her death. While he mourned, a man came over to demand payment for the cremation. Since he had no money, the man tried to rip the urn out of his hands. Then it dropped. The urn shattered, spreading his grandmother's ashes all over the floor. From that day on, the young man took any job he could find. He kept remembering his grandmother's words, that money and fame could not buy everything. Then he stood in the rain, staring at his belongings. He had been evicted, and everything he owned was dumped out on the street. That was when he became certain that without money and fame, he could not buy anything at all. He wrote himself a note, promising never to let anyone look down on him again. After that, he threw himself into his studies and chased his goal with obsession. He would do whatever it took to climb to the top, even if it meant abandoning the weak. He cut off incompetent people and joined hands only with those who could help him rise. That was how he finally reached the top of QS Corporation. There, his workers ended up begging at his feet, but he did not feel even the slightest pity. In his mind, if they wanted to avoid that bad ending, they simply should have stopped being incompetent. It was better for that trash to vanish from his sight. He wanted to teach those lucky-born failures a lesson. He wanted them to experience what real hell felt like. At that moment, a strange being approached him. It judged him useful for its goal and asked if he had ever thought about handling the humans he hated in a different way. That was when he discovered a path where he would never be at a disadvantage again. He continued walking through the mansion. Yeom Seung-gi finally stood face to face with his enemy. The young man sensed him and froze, because by all logic, that man should have been in the main hall. He was ready to make the guy pay for humiliating him like some disposable side character. The enemy was shaken to see the main character right in front of him, when he should have been stuck near the entrance hall. The businessman shouted that he would punish him for the crime of making him look like a fool. He stepped closer with total confidence, convinced this showdown was already his win. His first reason was simple. He believed the young man could not drag him into hell, since that hell was probably far less flexible than his own. Even during the battle with Gagaka, even when they crossed paths at the hospital, and even during the party. Not once, even when his life was on the line, did the main character use his ki. That alone suggested his hell had serious limits. His second reason was that the young man had already committed the sin of incompetence. He had attacked without properly understanding his opponent's abilities, and he kept depending only on cold logic. Against someone as insanely capable as the businessman, rebelling was a fatal mistake, and that mistake brought them straight to this moment. But were the businessman's conclusions actually correct? Had the young man truly committed the sin of incompetence? The answer was obvious, because the key never reacted. That made the businessman even more uneasy. After all, if he could see the future while his opponent could not, then the incompetent one should have been the other guy. Unable to understand it, the businessman turned toward Ram. Then he started arguing with the demon. He demanded to know if predicting the young man's move did not prove he was the more competent one. Ram looked at him and swallowed hard. No matter how loudly his human yelled, the outcome had already been locked in. The young man began to smile. Seeing the future really was an incredible system-like ability. But in that situation, what could it actually change? Even if the businessman walked right up to him, the young man could no longer sense the aura of death. That meant the businessman was no longer a real threat. A crime is decided by what a person actually does. But But does simply thinking about murder make someone a criminal? The answer was no, which meant the future the businessman saw and tried to alter could no longer count as an actual crime. Even if he predicted the young man's crime, he had already prevented it from happening. To finish him off, the young man threw the truth right in his face. The businessman had never understood how to properly use his own power. The businessman was left in total shock, realizing nobody had been correct, because he could only see the future 3 times a year. This was the first time he had truly used the ability, and waiting so long made his ignorance explode in his face. Even then, he still believed the young man could not send him to hell, so nothing would change. But then the young man's key began to shine. The businessman wondered why this never appeared in his vision, yet was happening now. The truth was simple. By changing the future, the young man had gained the right to send him into his hell. After all, the businessman had committed the sin of betrayal against him. He screamed in panic, insisting he had always made the right choices in life. But that was exactly why he was being judged, because every choice served only himself, making betrayal unavoidable. A portal ripped open, and dark tentacles reached for the businessman like monsters from a dungeon. And with that, the businessman was seized and dragged into the young man's hell. His final screams echoed out, then the doors began to close for good. The winner had been decided. Sometimes, waiting just a little longer is the smartest move. Because he chose not to attack the detective that day, he was able to catch the businessman in the end. So this is how he goes out, Ram said, dissolving in front of the two of them. Baphomet looked absolutely thrilled. They moved on toward their next objective. But for a brief second, the young man's legs gave out. Baphomet asked why he reacted like that, since there were still plenty of players left to eliminate. Yeom Seung-gi answered that he was not holding back. But the pressure from those gangsters crashing the party had been insane, and using split-second strategy to defeat Yu Nung-han at the last moment had completely drained him. No ordinary person could adapt that fast in such a chaotic situation. His abilities were clearly leveling up. Now it was finally time to end everything. On one side stood the guests connected to businessman Yu Nung-han. On the other side were the members of Che Mu-jin's gang. It was a messy situation for Hell creators like Gagaka and others. Park Sang-sik was caught in it too, but by using the surveillance room to his advantage. The main character started working out a way to bring order to the chaos. It was time to clean the battlefield. He picked up his phone and called the police. To make the performance more convincing, he pressed a finger against his throat. Then he started coughing. When the officer answered, he spoke in a rough, strained voice. He shouted that gangsters had stormed the party he was attending, and that the whole place had turned into chaos. The officer immediately asked for the location. His acting was flawless. He called the police because he needed to clean up the mess as fast as possible. After all, normal people and players were packed into the same place. If anything strange happened, panic would spread and everyone might start attacking each other. The second reason was simple. He needed Choi Mu-jin's allies locked down quickly. And just like that, the police arrived and began arresting the gangsters one by one. But one unpredictable variable was still moving. The girl's demon was among the people being arrested, and the moment he found an opening, he possessed a police officer. He seized the man's body for himself. Then he realized something was seriously wrong. He had to protect his human right away, so he let the gun fall from his hands. Then he rushed toward her. The young man watched it all through the security cameras. He told Hu Mincha to leave the car immediately. She put her earpiece back in. Then she stepped out of the vehicle. Yu Nung-han had already been defeated, so her mission was finished. She said goodbye to Choi Mu-jin and ran off like an ordinary local resident. A little later, Cherubim reached the car worried about his human, but everything that had happened left her in a dangerous position. She never imagined someone as powerful and tactical as Yu Nung-han would appear. Without even attacking directly, his opponent had captured him and still managed to humiliate her. They had to get out fast. The guy she had spoken to on the phone was no ordinary player. He was dangerous. Meanwhile, the main character focused on destroying the evidence recorded that night. He yanked out several cables and hurled the computer across the room. He kept kicking the black box until it short-circuited. The police could not find out what happened that night. If they did, a witch hunt against Hell creators would begin. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it. He blasted the computers with foam. With that, almost everything was handled. Now he just had to disappear into the crowd and escape. Baphomet asked if there was still anything left to do. The main character froze. One thing was still missing. Yu Nung-han's ally, the streamer Gagaka. With the police arriving and no way to reach the businessman, the streamer made the same choice as the main character and blended into the crowd to escape. Suddenly, someone stopped him, nearly scaring him out of his skin. But the person behind him was only a friendly police officer saying he would escort him home and that there was nothing to fear. He thanked the officer and got into the car, barely believing he had survived. But he had no clue about the third reason the main character had called the police. It was because the detective had a way to separate Gagaka from the other guests. Once inside the car, Gagaka let out a relieved sigh, still stunned that he was alive. He gave the officer his address, but the streamer had no idea the person taking him away was another hell creator just like him. Park Sang-sik started the engine and pulled onto the road, but halfway through the ride, Gagaka realized something felt wrong. They did not seem to be heading toward the city center. That was when he finally turned to look at the driver, and he noticed Detective Park still looking sick. Yu Nunghan had told him the detective was on their side, but if this man was taking him somewhere suspicious while the businessman had vanished, there was a real chance he was a fake. He had to escape that car right away. Since the vehicle was not moving too fast, he thought he could use that opening. He tried to jump out, but he forgot one brutal detail. The door might be locked. And just like that, he was completely trapped, alone beside the enemy. A patrol car was nothing like a taxi. Those doors were not meant to open that easily. Gagaka tries threatening him with his key, saying the driver has the disadvantage here. But Fernando is not shaken at all, and he tells Gagaka to go ahead and open the portal. The boy is stunned speechless by that answer. He thought he still had one last card to play, but he was wrong. Bluffing was useless against the detective now. Fernando had already formed a few theories about the young man's ability. First, every time he sent someone to hell, it happened in a specific location. In other words, his power had an activation range tied to a place. If the location did not belong to him, he could not open the portal. Then the detective pulls out his own key and warns that if Gagaka will not open his hell, he can do it instead. After sending that many people to hell, there was no way this boy could claim innocence. So if he wanted to survive a little longer, he needed to sit still like an obedient kid. Seeing no escape route left, Gagaka accepts the officer's terms. At last, they reach their destination, and the main character is already waiting there. Somehow the young man had arrived before them. He jokes that the taxi driver turned into Fast and Furious the moment he offered double fare. The detective says the important part is that he arrived safely, and now it is time for the main character to step in. The moment the door opens, Gagaka bolts out of the car faster than a rabbit. He drops to his knees in front of the young man and begs for mercy, saying he was wrong and would do anything to be forgiven. But the second he lifts his head, he realizes forgiveness will not come that easily. Both men stare down at him like he is some lower-ranked monster in a dungeon. This was the person Yu Nunghan had called the detective's lackey. But the truth looked completely different. If anything, the detective was the one serving him. The businessman had underestimated that nerd and paid the price. If gangsters had done it, at least a body would have turned up. The young man walks toward the kneeling boy who turns his face away. He says Gagaka has probably figured it out by now. Yu Nunghan is trapped in his hell. So now they have to decide what to do with the little rat left behind. Without a shred of shame, the redhead starts begging for his life. But if he wants to live, he has to prove he can be useful. The young man gives a faint smile. Ever since seeing Gagaka at the mansion, he had already been thinking of ways to use him. The reason was simple. Gagaka's hell condition was perfect for defense. Basically, it worked like an automatic laser tower that wiped out intruders. Even better than that was the power of his demon, Jinjiang. With that ability, he could confuse enemies or turn Gagaka into a decoy. Before the final battle, dealing with Gagaka was absolutely necessary, but since the game was still ongoing, he remained a useful piece on the board. From a distance, someone watches the chaos of police cars gathered outside the mansion. Now that the police had shown up, the game was unfortunately paused for the moment. It was the demoness Sumana. She asks her human Jane Doe who she thinks won the battle. Jane answers that Yu Nunghan lost, even though she once believed he was a strong contender. If he had won, he would never have called the police and risked hurting his reputation or exposing himself. If he wanted a cleanup, he would have used private security, which left only one possible conclusion. But it probably was not the gangster who defeated him either, since abandoning her own subordinates like that made no sense. A third player had entered the match. Sumana praises her human, saying she really is sharp. That means their next target has to be that unknown third party. After all, they prefer hunting the biggest fish. Jane Doe presses her pen against her clipboard. Before he can flip the entire game board they built, they have to send him to hell. In a trashed room, Zhang Zhangchul lies buried under his blanket. Gorgodon Killis was not happy seeing him like this. He understood the human was traumatized, but hiding at home doing nothing would not fix anything. The architect keeps complaining that he is completely exhausted by this whole mess. He is sick of Yu Sung-han, sick of the gangsters, and just look at him. His precious fingers were broken. After everything that happened, he had zero desire to step outside again. He would rather stay home and survive on delivery food. He only made a contract with that demon because his coworkers were driving him insane. He never signed up for this kind of fantasy nightmare. Gorgodon clearly regretted choosing this guy as his human too. Then the doorbell suddenly rings. The shut-in tells them to leave the package at the door, but the bell keeps ringing nonstop. Irritated, he drags himself out of bed and heads for the door. He expected to see a delivery worker standing there. Instead, he comes face to face with another demon and its human contractor. The kid standing there is Song Min-woo. Despite being so young, he is also a demon creator. The news is obsessed with one story. Every channel is covering the bizarre disappearance of the QS conglomerate director. During his morning jog, the young man listens to the broadcast and feels like the game has entered a rare quiet phase. The pressure around the hunt has finally started to ease. Gagaka and the young man even relax together by playing video games and messing around. Even with that calm, Hu Minchai keeps digging into her research. Song Min-woo continues going to class like nothing has changed. Che Mu-jin also keeps working to recover the partners she lost. Jane Doe calmly takes her time building a new strategy, and the reason is obvious. Once Yu Nonghan was removed, the whole game became far more balanced. When too many players are active, it becomes much easier to track them down and expose their weaknesses. By now, plenty of time has passed since the game began, and everyone understands the rules better. They know that drawing too much attention basically turns them into easy targets. Lucifer watches from above. Only 7 players are left in the game. But this peaceful atmosphere does not suit the King of Hell at all, and honestly he is starting to get bored. Suddenly, a demon appears beside him. This is Temagul, Lucifer's assistant. Temagul explains that this kind of formation was expected, since games with too many players naturally create alliances and balance. But the king complains that the game he joined 700 years ago was nothing like this. Back then, nobody could relax for even a second, and brutal battles broke out constantly. That was the kind of action he wanted to see. So Temagul suggests making a plan to shatter the calm. The king looks at him, clearly interested in the idea. His assistant then points to one of the players on the screen. Why not call that young man in for a private little chat? After all, he is the reason the game stabilized, and he stands at the center of the alliance. Meanwhile, back in the real world, the young man continues his walk. Then he stops for a moment to catch his breath. Baphomet appears behind him and asks if the human is not tired from running so much. The young man says his stamina is what saved him during the fight with the serial killer. Besides, he has no idea what kind of player he might face next, or what kind of demon ability could appear. Baphomet cannot decide whether to praise him for being careful or for being so hardworking. The young man uses the moment to ask how things are going in hell, and whether anyone is trying to escape. The demon pulls up his surveillance tablet. He says there have been attempts, especially from the smarter sinners, but both of them know that no matter how hard they try, the young man is a genius. There is no escaping his personal hell. There is not even a hint that the sinners are preparing an attack or plotting anything serious. Suddenly, the brick he is clinging to breaks loose from the wall. It sends Yu Nonghan falling back into the pit. Still, Baphomet has one more question. He wants to know how long the young man plans to keep that alliance going. They are already halfway through the game, and maintaining such a large alliance is dangerous. It will become even harder if he starts getting emotionally attached. The others might even decide to eliminate him first. The image of Hu Minchae and Park Sang-sik activating their keys and apologizing flashes through his mind. The young man goes quiet. He places a hand on Baphomet's shoulder. Then he says that, in the end, the choice is his to make. The demon only needs to keep trusting him. Yeom Seung-gi wanted to believe him, but he had no plans to get wiped out just because of human feelings. While they were talking, something completely unexpected happened. Both of them instantly snapped their attention toward the same direction. Through the smoke, Temagul appeared and calmly greeted them. It was obvious he was curious about the main character and the way he had been dominating this deadly game. But since the demon was not used to human names, he could not even say the young man's full name properly. Human names sounded complicated to him, so he decided to call him Yom something instead. Baphomet asked why he had shown up out of nowhere, while the main character asked who this stranger was. The horned demon answered that he was Baphomet's assistant and his future successor. At first, the young man wondered why a demon like him would suddenly appear, but then he remembered something. At the start of the game, Baphomet had warned him that Lucifer could change the rules whenever he felt like it, and now that moment had finally come. He asked if the demon came to announce a new rule, and Temugul praised him for catching on so quickly. But before any rule change, Lucifer actually wanted to speak with them. Then the assistant reached out his hand. A portal suddenly opened beneath all 3 of them. In the next instant, they were standing inside Lucifer's palace. Lucifer welcomed them and casually said this place was his office. Baphomet dropped to one knee right away, while the main character was still trying to understand what was happening. Lucifer said he already knew Baphomet was capable, but he never expected his human to be just as impressive. Without using force, he gathered 4 of the 7 remaining players and even recruited a weak candidate. The demon admitted that hearing such words made him feel a little embarrassed, but Lucifer corrected him and said those words were not meant as praise. The king stepped closer to the 2 of them, clearly furious. The horned demon and his human were ruining his game. He wanted a thrilling survival game filled with epic battles, but they were turning it into a team-based strategy that even kids could play. After venting his anger, he tried to calm himself down. The king said he wanted to order Baphomet to pick another human and replace the young man. But that would be unfair and too random, since they had not violated any official game rules. Because of that, he decided the pair would receive a small penalty instead. Lucifer snapped his fingers. 2 screens appeared in front of them. On one screen was Hu Minchae, and on the other was Park Sang-sik. The King of Hell smiled wickedly, and said the main character had 1 week to send one of them to hell. The young man struggled to process what Lucifer had just told him. He turned to Baphomet and asked if such a forced rule could really be allowed. He had followed every rule without breaking a single one, so forcing him to betray his allies made no sense. The demon warned him to choose his words carefully, because the one standing before him was Lucifer, the king of hell. Even so, the human argued that there was no reason to punish them when they had not broken the game's rules. Lucifer called him bold, and said he now understood why Baphomet had signed a contract with him. But this was Lucifer's will, because the entire game existed purely for his entertainment. In other words, if the main character refused to follow the new rules, he could be replaced at any time. That was when the young man truly felt the overwhelming power of the king of hell. Now he had to decide who would stay by his side as an ally, and who he would personally drag down hell. With that, Lucifer said he was done talking and they could return to make their choice. Before sending them back to the human world, Lucifer tapped Baphomet and warned him not to make the game boring again. After those final words, they were returned to their original location. The main character's left hand suddenly began to tingle. When he pulled up his sleeve to check it, he found a countdown timer on his arm, proving he was on a time limit. That timer was both a problem and a reminder that they were now being forced to follow the king's orders. The young man started thinking about Park Sang-sik and Hu Min-chai. He knew that sooner or later in this brutal game, he might have to eliminate both of them. But for now, he turned the key. Then he stepped into the detective's house. As he sat on the couch and thought with both logic and emotion, eliminating one of them did not match his principles, at least not at this stage of the game, and definitely not under these forced conditions. So he thought of something and decided to ask his demon a question. But before he could speak, Baphomet cut him off and asked if he wanted to know which of the two was more useful. However, that was not what the young man had in mind. What he really wanted to ask about was the demons, especially Lucifer. Baphomet could not figure out what this human was really getting at. So the young man started by asking how Lucifer gained the authority to rule hell, and whether Baphomet had any chance of stealing that throne. The demon stared at him in shock. Out of every possibility he had imagined, that idea had never even entered his mind. The king claimed his rank because he built the greatest hell ever made, the hell of disbelief. And that hell was nothing short of a masterpiece. No hell before it had ever been packed with so many humans screaming and breaking down in pure despair. No hell before it had ever shown such clean structure, flexible design, and terrifying taste. In simple terms, the success of that hell elevated his status, and from there he quickly seized the power that governed hell itself. But one key figure was missing from that whole story. What exactly happened to Dante? As for him, the human received eternal life as his reward. That meant Dante was the world's first creator of hell, and there was a real chance he was still alive. In theory, yes, he was the first and he was likely still alive. But if Dante were cast into hell now, what would happen to Lucifer? From inside the cathedral, the voice of a priest echoed through the hall. He preached God's word, urging everyone to believe through faith. Meanwhile, his followers listened with burning devotion. That priest was Dante himself, the creator of the hell of disgrace. In theory, if the human who once met Lucifer was thrown into hell, the king's existence would vanish. Yeom-sungi shot to his feet, but Baphomet immediately rejected the plan. It was only a theory, and taking on the owner of hell would never be that simple. The main character simply needed to choose carefully and survive the game until he was the last one standing. That was the safest path to keep everyone alive, but he had already made up his mind. From this point on, there were several dangerous variables to calculate. What if Lucifer suddenly changed his plan? He could keep the game running under the rules he had already created, then slip in ridiculous special conditions aimed only at me. In other words, I am a problem he cannot ignore, and the odds are high that he will change his mind before the game ends just to stop me from winning. They locked eyes for a moment, and Baphomet had no way to deny it. After all, he was already forcing high-ranking demons to clash with each other, an outrageous scheme to gather more power. And now he wanted to put a leash on the young man. On top of that, there was a strong chance this guy's hell would survive far into the future. The demon stood completely still, so he asked what idea his human had in mind, because it might become a direct contest for control over hell. The young man simply reached his hand toward Baphomet and said that if this plan worked, his survival rate would be 100%.